Tonight, as you ease yourself into this quiet moment, something tender and timeless is waiting for you. 13 ancient stories, carried on the breath of centuries, whispered across the ages to restless hearts just like yours. For more than 1,000 years, these stories have been lanterns in the dark, gentle voices that know how to soften the noise in your mind and guide you home to the stillness that has never left you. Each tale carries its own medicine for the weary spirit. They are like keys, small and delicate, yet powerful enough to open the hidden doors of your heart. They do not demand anything from you. They simply arrive offering comfort, like an old friend sitting beside you when words are no longer needed. These aren't just stories. They are gentle hands, reaching through time, brushing against the heaviness you carry tonight, and reminding you that you are not alone. The Buddha knew this truth well. Peace is not something you chase. It is not something lost in the distance. Peace already lives inside you, quietly, patiently, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be felt. And so, in this moment, no matter where you are, peace is here. Perhaps you are listening from a small apartment where the hum of the city rises and falls outside your window like a mechanical lullaby. Or maybe you are in a countryside room where the soft chorus of crickets weaves its music through the cool night air. You might even be lying on a couch, still wrapped in the weight of the day's worries, unable to fully put them down. Wherever you are, whatever surrounds you, know this: you are safe here now. This space is for you. Let your body remember what it means to rest deeply. Notice the surface beneath you, how it holds you effortlessly, as if the earth itself is cradling your weight. Feel the slow rhythm of your breath, each inhale and exhale like a tide washing in and out. The air moving through you invites your muscles to soften, invites your shoulders to drop, invites you to let go. And as your body surrenders, the stories begin to unfold. Tales of boats drifting without resistance on wide rivers, of monks who discover joy in the smallest of gestures, a cup of tea, a falling leaf, the sound of rain against a wooden roof. Each story carries a quiet shift, a turning of the soul, as though you are coming home after wandering for a very long time. And now, our first story is ready for you. The Lost Manuscript. Long ago, there lived a humble monk named Dogen. He dwelled in a simple monastery, high in the mountains, far removed from the restless noise of the world below. The days there were marked by silence, prayer, and the rhythm of temple bells echoing against the cliffs. While many of the monks devoted themselves only to meditation and chanting, Dogen felt another calling tugging at his heart. He believed that wisdom should not remain locked within temple walls. It should not be reserved only for those who wore robes. Instead, he saw wisdom as water flowing, living, and meant for everyone who thirsted for peace. So Dogen began a task that few dared to attempt. He set out to preserve the ancient teachings in writing, ensuring that the light of Zen could continue to shine long after voices had faded into silence. For 7 years, he worked on a special manuscript. His dedication was unwavering. Each morning, long before the first hint of dawn, when the stars still clung to the night sky, Dogen would rise quiet. While the other monks slept soundly, he would light a single candle in his small wooden chamber. The flame, steady and warm, was his only companion, as he dipped his brush into ink and pressed it carefully onto rice paper. Stroke by stroke, character by character, his hand moved with patience and care. This was no ordinary book. It was a weaving of the deepest Zen teachings he had received from his masters, bound together with the insights he had gathered through decades of his own practice. It was not just writing, it was a living river of wisdom, flowing from his heart onto the fragile paper. Every stroke of Dogen's brush was more than writing, it was meditation itself. The bristles touch the paper with the same care. A monk offers incense at the altar, the same reverence a gardener gives to planting seeds in fertile soil. Each word was placed not hurriedly, but with patience, as if he were laying stepping stones across a quiet river. He wrote of the nature of mind, of its vastness and clarity when freed from illusion. He wrote of the path to awakening, simple and unadorned, and of the everyday practices, a mindful breath, a moment of silence, a bow of gratitude that could open peace to anyone willing to listen. His words carried no weight of authority, no demand for obedience. They were offerings, gentle invitations to turn inward and remember. The pages grew slowly, almost like the unfurling of a tree reaching toward light. Each passage sprouted from the last, its roots entwined, its branches rising in harmony. The manuscript was not just a book, it became a living garden of wisdom, growing quietly under his hand. It became his treasure, not because of pride, but because of love. He loved the teachings that had set his heart free. He loved the thought of them reaching others, easing suffering where it had taken root. He knew deep in his bones that these words could guide countless wanderers home. Sometimes other monks would find him asleep at his writing desk, his brush still resting in his hand, a smudge of ink drying on the page. The candle beside him would have burned down to a stub, leaving its faint perfume of wax and smoke lingering in the air. His robes would be folded loosely around him as he leaned against the wooden desk, exhausted yet peaceful, the night's devotion etched across his face. 7 years passed in this rhythm of devotion, and as the final autumn drew near, Dogen's manuscript was nearly complete. 500 pages of distilled wisdom, a river of words flowing from his heart onto tape. He dreamed of having it carefully copied, each duplicate a lantern to be carried into monasteries and temples across Japan. He imagined seekers, generations into the future, finding comfort in these pages when their own hearts grew restless. One crisp autumn evening, golden leaves waltzed past his window, carried by the breath of the mountain wind. Dogen dipped his brush one final time, laying the last elegant stroke on the final page of his life's work. He set the brush down gently, sat back, and closed his eyes for a moment of silent gratitude. What he felt was not pride, nor the thrill of accomplishment, but a deep, quiet satisfaction, the sweetness of service. The work was complete, not for him, but for all who would come after. Tomorrow, he thought, he would present the manuscript to his abbot. Tomorrow, the process of sharing this light with the world would begin. That night, as darkness settled across the mountain, the winds grew fierce. The trees, ancient and gnarled, groaned and creaked like old bones shifting under strain. The shutters of the monastery rattled against their frames, as if the mountain itself were sighing. But Dogen, weary from years of devotion, slept peacefully. On his desk lay the manuscript, carefully stacked and weighted down by a smooth, polished riverstone. It rested like a silent guardian over his treasure. But sometime before dawn, the storm gathered its full breath. A violent gust pressed against the wooden frame of his poorly latched window until it burst open with a cry. In an instant, the candle stubs flickered and died. The air roared into his chamber, lifting the manuscript as though it were a flock of white birds startled into flight. Pages spun into the night, scattering through the darkness with frantic wings. Dogen woke to the sound of chaos, the frantic beating of shutters, the wild flurry of paper. Rushing to his desk, his heart sank as he saw the riverstone toppled, the pile of pages no longer whole, but flying wildly into the storm. Barefoot and desperate, he hurried into the courtyard, the cold stones biting at his feet. The night air lashed against his robes as he tried to gather what he could. A handful of pages clung stubbornly to bushes and fence posts, trembling like frightened children. He reached for them, but the wind tore them from his grasp, carrying them higher, farther beyond the monastery walls. By the time he stood there in the courtyard, chest heaving, the storm had claimed nearly all. Pages danced in the air like autumn leaves, rising, swirling, disappearing into the dark unknown. 7 years of devotion, 7 years of candlelight and ink, scattered into the hungry night. 7 years of careful work, hundreds of hours bent over parchment, countless nights of flickering candlelight, brush dipped again and again into dark ink, vanished into the mountain wilderness in the span of a single storm. A lifetime of devotion, scattered in minutes, as if the wind itself had decided to claim the teachings. When dawn broke, the monastery courtyard was filled with whispers and hurried footsteps. The other monks had gathered, expecting to find their brother and teacher broken by grief. Surely, they thought, no heart could bear such a loss without trembling. They prepared words of comfort, phrases of consolation, even offers to form search parties. Some imagined combing the hillsides, climbing trees, retrieving fragile pages from rivers and thickets. But when they found Dogen, he was not kneeling in sorrow, nor frantically searching the ground. He stood quietly in the center of the courtyard, his robes stirring softly in the morning breeze, watching the last few pages flutter into the pale gold of dawn. His posture was still, his gaze untroubled. And on his lips there was the faintest smile, as though he were witnessing something hidden, something beautiful, that only he could see. One young monk, hesitant and unsure, finally stepped forward. "Master Dogen," he said gently, his voice carrying both pity and urgency, "we are so sorry about your manuscript. 7 years of your life, all those words, all that wisdom gone in a single night. Please allow us to help. Shall we organize a search party to bring the pages back?" Dogen turned toward the gathering. His eyes, far from sorrowful, sparkled with an unexpected joy, like sunlight glinting off a river. He let the silence linger before he spoke. "Search for what?" he asked softly, almost playfully. "The wind needed those pages more than I did. Who am I to argue with such a thorough distribution method?" The monks exchanged bewildered glances. They stood in silence, the weight of his words pressing against the limits of their understanding. How could their teacher remain so calm when his life's work had scattered into the mountains? At last, one elder monk, who had known Dogen for many years, found the courage to voice what they all felt. "But master," he said, his tone heavy with sorrow, "doesn't this loss pain you? Is it not unbearable to see all that wisdom gone forever?" Dogen laughed softly. The sound was not bitter nor forced, but light, like water flowing gently over smooth stones. It carried no trace of regret. "My dear friends," he said, placing his hand over his heart, "do you think wisdom lives only on paper? Every word I wrote came from here." He pressed his palm firmly against his chest, and here it remains, alive, breathing, ready to be shared again, whenever and however the moment calls for it. He lifted his gaze to the mountains, where the last of his pages had disappeared into the wind's embrace. "Perhaps a bird will line her nest with words about compassion," he mused. "Perhaps a stream will carry teachings of impermanence to the valleys below. Perhaps the pages will crumble into the soil, nourishing the roots of trees that will, one day, become new paper, ready to carry someone else's wisdom. Tell me, is this not the way of all things? To return, to transform, to be used anew?" The young monk, who had first offered to search, shook his head in amazement. His heart longed to understand, but his mind still wrestled with confusion. "But Master," he said again, "if the teachings were so important, how can you let them go so easily?" Dogen smiled, his face calm and luminous in the morning light. "Ah," he said softly, "that is exactly the teaching the wind came to offer us today. The moment we cling to our creations, we stop creating. The moment we hold our gifts too tightly, we close our hands to giving. To let go is not to lose, it is to trust that what is true will never leave us." The monk stood in silence, the weight of his words sinking into them more deeply than any manuscript ever could. "My manuscript was meant to teach non-attachment. How perfect, then, that it should demonstrate the lesson so completely." Can you feel the incredible freedom in Dogen's response? Here was a man who had poured 7 years of devotion into something fragile, precious. Hundreds of dawns spent bent over paper, hundreds of nights spent by candlelight, only to watch it vanish into the wildness of the mountain winds in a single night. And yet, instead of collapsing into grief or bitterness, instead of clinging to what was lost, he discovered joy. He received the storm not as a thief, but as a teacher, and in its sudden destruction, he found the very lesson he had been trying to preserve. The Buddha once taught, "You are not punished for your anger, you are punished by your anger." Dogen embodied this truth perfectly. To rage at the wind for being wind, to mourn endlessly for paper that had already flown. This would have been to heap suffering upon suffering. Instead, he chose to release his grasp, and in doing so, he remained free. This is the essence of non-attachment. It does not mean we love our work less, or our relationships less. It does not mean indifference, apathy, or cold detachment. Rather, it means we hold what we love with such openness that we can embrace it fully while it is here, and yet let it go gracefully when it changes or passes away. Dogen loved his manuscript deeply. Every word, every brushstroke, every quiet candlelit night spent in service to wisdom. But he loved wisdom itself even more. And when the two came into conflict, when the preservation of words clashed with the living truth of impermanence, wisdom won. Most of us do not live this way. We cling to our creations, to our achievements, to the carefully built structures of our lives, as though they could defy time. We pour immense energy into guarding what we have built, defending it from the inevitable tide of change, shielding it from decay, resisting the winds that will one day scatter it. And when, despite all of this effort, loss still arrives, as it always does, we feel betrayed, as if life itself has broken a promise. But Dogen had discovered something luminous, that true security does not come from clutching at our accomplishments. It comes from trusting in the unbroken wellspring of our own creativity, our own wisdom, our own ability to begin anew. The storm had carried away the form, but not the source. The wisdom that filled his manuscript did not vanish with the pages. It remained alive, flowing, radiant in his heart, ready to take whatever form the next moment required. In your own life, notice how tightly you grasp your creations. It may not be a manuscript, but perhaps it is a carefully crafted email that gets misread. A project you poured months into that is suddenly cancelled, or plans you cherished that dissolve at the last minute. These are your scattered pages. When this happens, ask yourself, do I respond like Dogen, trusting that nothing truly valuable can ever be lost? Do I trust that the same source that allowed me to create once is still here within me, ready to create again? Or do I cling so tightly to the outcome I imagined that change feels like betrayal, that life itself feels like an adversary? The Buddha said, "Let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Do not try to figure anything out. Do not try to make anything happen. Relax, right now, and rest. These words are not an escape from life, but an invitation into its deepest current. For when you let go, you do not fall, you flow. You discover that the river has been carrying you all along. This isn't advice to become passive, to stop trying, or to withdraw from life. It's an invitation to hold our efforts lightly enough that we can give them freely without fear of losing them. Dogen understood this. He never rewrote his lost manuscript. Instead, he turned entirely toward the living moment. He devoted himself to teaching directly, from heart to heart, person to person, moment to moment. His wisdom spread not through preserved pages gathering dust in libraries, but through the living soil of transformed heart. Perhaps this was always how it was meant to be shared, not through paper, but through presence. Not as words stored in ink, but as seeds planted in silence, watered by compassion, and awakened in those who are ready to listen. And so, tonight, as you rest in this peaceful space, notice if there is something you are holding too tightly. Perhaps it is worry over a project, an attachment to how others see you, or resistance to the changes that are already unfolding in your life. These things can weigh as heavily on the heart as Dogen's manuscript weighed on his desk that final night. Can you offer these concerns the same gentle release that Dogen offered his scattered pages? Can you trust the winds of life to carry what no longer belongs to you? Notice how good it feels to simply rest without needing to control what tomorrow may bring. This is Dogen's gift to you, the reminder that what matters most is never truly lost, because it does not live in the fragile things we create. It lives in who we are. Sometimes, however, this inner freedom is not tested by quiet loss, but by fiery confrontation. Sometimes life sends not the soft winds of a storm, but the sharp edge of anger to see how deeply our peace runs. In a crowded temple, not far from Dogen's mountain monastery, another wise teacher was about to meet such a test. The angry priest. There lived a Zen master named Bankei, whose teachings were considered revolutionary in his time. Where others relied on complicated rituals, long austerities, or difficult practices, Bankei spoke of something much simpler, much more immediate. He taught what he called the unborn Buddha mind, the natural awareness that exists in each of us, always peaceful, always present, unstained by anything that comes and goes. His teaching was like clear water in a world used to drinking from muddy wells. Simple, pure, transformative. So simple, in fact, that people traveled great distances to hear him. Farmers left their fields, merchants closed their shops, monks and laypeople alike made the journey, eager for a glimpse of the freedom he described. His temple became a gathering place for seekers of every kind, drawn not only by his words, but by the quiet radiance of his presence. On this particular day, the temple was more crowded than ever. Men and women sat shoulder to shoulder on the polished wooden floors, their robes and garments brushing against one another. Others stood pressed along the walls, while still more leaned through the open doors, straining to catch every word. The air was fragrant with incense, smoke rising in thin silver curls toward the beams above. The hall itself seemed to breathe with the collective stillness of hundreds of seekers. A low hush settled, broken only by the occasional cough or the shifting of wooden sandals. And at the front, seated with effortless composure, was Bankei. His face was calm, his posture relaxed, and his words carried through the space not with force but with ease, as though the silence itself wanted to deliver them. Your Buddha nature, he said softly, needs no training, no forcing, no struggle. It is already perfect, like a clear mirror. The mirror reflects all things, yet it is never stained by what it shows. The listeners leaned forward, captivated. For in his presence, it was not only words they heard, it was the unmistakable taste of peace itself. The crowd sat in rapt attention. The temple hushed, except for the rise and fall of Bank's voice. His words seemed to move through the hall, like a calm breeze, touching each heart with quiet recognition. Many listeners felt their eyes grow wet, not from sorrow, but from relief. For years, perhaps decades, they had believed enlightenment to be a distant prize, reachable only after long years of hardship, strict rituals, and endless striving. Yet here was this gentle master, telling them that what they were seeking was already within them, present in this very breath. For the first time they were hearing that awakening was not about becoming something new, but about recognizing what had always been true. Tears slipped silently down weathered cheeks. Merchants forgot the weight of their ledgers. Farmers forgot the calluses on their hands. In that moment, the crowd was united by a shared realization. They were already whole. But then, like thunder cracking across a clear sky, came a voice that tore through the serenity. "This is nonsense." The words boomed from the back of the hall, startling everyone from their stillness. All heads swiveled toward the source. A priest was forcing his way through the crowd, his movements sharp, impatient. His robes marked him as a member of the Nichiren sect, and his very presence carried the energy of confrontation. His face was flushed, his brows knotted, his hands clenched into fists, as if ready for battle. "You're misleading these people," he roared, his voice echoing off the wooden beams. "You speak of an easy path, a lazy path, but true Buddhism demands discipline, study, and endless devotion. You are mocking the Buddha's sacred teachings with this dangerous talk of effortless awakening." A shiver passed through the assembly. Murmurs rippled like uneasy waves. Some people glanced toward the temple guards, expecting them to intervene. Others looked down at the floor, fearful of the growing tension. The stillness that had filled the air only moments before seemed shattered, replaced with nervous energy. Children pressed closer to their parents. Elderly hands clutched prayer beads tighter. And yet, at the front of the temple, Master Bank sat utterly unmoved. Not a flicker crossed his serene face. His posture remained as steady as a mountain, his breath calm and even, as though the anger rushing toward him were no different than the sound of a bird outside or the shifting of incense smoke. To him, this was not an intrusion. It was simply another moment, another expression of life unfolding. He gazed at the angry priest with the same gentle attention he had been offering the entire hall. "What sect are you from?" Bank asked softly, his voice carrying no hint of irritation, no need to defend. "I am a priest of the Nichiren sect," the man declared, his chest swelling with pride, certain that the weight of his lineage and tradition would silence the quiet teacher. "We follow the true path of the Lotus Sutra, not this diluted nonsense you dare to spread." Bank nodded, as though he had just been told something as ordinary as the day's weather. His expression was not mocking, but genuinely curious, as if he were peering into the heart of the moment itself. "And tell me," he asked, tilting his head slightly, "when did this anger of yours become part of the teachings of your sect?" The words fell into the room like a small pebble dropped into still water. A long silence rippled outward. The priest froze, his mouth open, but no words came forth. His rage, which had moments ago seemed so strong, suddenly appeared exposed, like a fire that flares brightly before realizing it has no fuel left. He had been so consumed by his fury, so carried away by the righteousness of his anger, that he had not noticed what it was doing to him, how it twisted his body, clouded his mind, and silenced his wisdom. Bank's voice remained calm, steady, almost tender. "You see," he continued, "this is exactly what I was speaking of. When we abandon our unborn Buddha mind, our clear, natural awareness, we become prisoners of our emotions and reactions. In clinging to anger, we lose the very truth we claim to defend. But the mind that notices this anger, the awareness that simply sees, remains untouched. That witnessing presence does not burn, it does not clench, it does not shout, it simply observes. It is still, unborn, perfectly calm. The priest's face began to shift. The tightness in his jaw loosened. The storm in his eyes softened. For the first time in the entire exchange, something within him stirred that was deeper than anger. He caught a glimpse of the one who was watching his fury, the quiet awareness that had been there all along. It was as if he had been standing too close to a roaring fire, blinded by its flames, and suddenly took a step back. He realized he didn't need to press his face against the blaze. He could feel its heat without being consumed by it. "Your anger," Banks said gently, his voice carrying the compassion of a parent speaking to a child, "arises from your thoughts about what Buddhism should be. But the mind that notices these thoughts, that is your true nature. It is not stained by your anger. It does not need to be purified or trained into perfection. It is already awake, already free, already the Buddha's mind." The priest stood motionless, his fists unclenched. The fire that moments ago threatened to engulf the temple dissolved into quiet embers. He was no longer a man defending doctrine. He was a man awakening to himself. In that instant, he wasn't reading a sutra or memorizing a teaching. He was living it. The entire temple bore witness. Hundreds of people, shoulder to shoulder, watched with wide eyes and open mouths. Silence stretched across the room, not heavy but luminous. It was the silence of recognition, of seeing truth embodied before them. Some smiled through tears, remembering their own moments when a storm of rage or despair had broken and left behind a sudden, inexplicable peace. Then slowly, reverently, the priest bowed. His head touched the wooden floor. When he rose, his voice was transformed, stripped of pride and aggression. It was soft, almost childlike in its sincerity. "Thank you," he whispered, "for showing me my original face." The phrase carried weight in Zen. It meant glimpsing the self that existed before conditioning, before opinions, before clinging and judgment. The face of pure awareness itself. With humility, the priest moved to the side and sat among the other listeners, no longer a challenger, but a fellow seeker. Bank turned his gaze back to the assembly. His voice once again flowed through the hall, calm and steady as a river. "This," he said, "is what the Buddha meant when he taught. Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment." He paused, letting the words settle like incense smoke. "In this very moment, your awareness is already complete. No matter what arises around you, your true nature is untouched. Just as the mirror is not stained by the images it reflects, your awareness is not stained by anger, grief, or desire. It simply reflects. It remains undisturbed." The crowd sat in stillness, their breathing deepening. A shift had taken place, not only in the priest, but in the entire room. "Can you feel the incredible peace in Banks' response?" Here was a man so deeply rooted in the present moment that even the force of another's fury could not pull him away. He did not resist the interruption. He did not fight or suppress it. He simply allowed it to be part of the unfolding moment, and because he remained unmoved, the anger itself dissolved. This is the heart of mindfulness. It is not about forcing the mind to be perfectly quiet, nor is it about hiding from difficulty. It is about discovering the part of ourselves that remains steady no matter what storms rage around us. Most of us, however, live like that priest in his first moments, completely consumed by our reactions. Someone cuts us off in traffic, and suddenly we become anger. A piece of bad news arrives, and we become worry. A careless word wounds us, and we become hurt. Our thoughts about how things should be, or how they should not be, take over our entire being. We lose ourselves in the storm. But if we step back, even slightly, we see the fire without being burned. We notice anger without being anger. We notice worry without being worry. And in that space we rediscover our original face, our unborn, unshaken mind. But Bank had discovered something wonderful, something so subtle most people never notice. There is a part of us that is always watching. The mind that notices anger isn't angry. The awareness that recognizes worry isn't worried. The witness that sees fear isn't afraid. This witnessing consciousness is like the open sky. Storms of thought and emotion may roll through, but the sky itself remains untouched, always present, always still, always available. When we rest in this awareness, life's challenges stop being threats to our peace. They become doorways, opportunities to deepen our understanding and compassion. Like Bank with the angry priest, we can meet disruption not with resistance or reactivity, but with curiosity and calm presence. The Buddha taught that peace can only be found here, in this very moment, not in some future when every problem is solved, not in an imagined past where everything was perfect, but right here, right now, even in the midst of discomfort, uncertainty, or loss. This doesn't mean passivity. It doesn't mean ignoring problems or refusing to act. Bank responded to the priest, but he responded from a place of clarity, not compulsion, from awareness, not agitation. And because he stood rooted in that calm, his words became medicine, not only for the priest, but for everyone present. In your own life, notice how often you become fused with your reactions. Someone speaks rudely, and suddenly you are the hurt. A delay at work arises, and suddenly you are stress and frustration. These are human, natural responses, but they are not who you truly are. Beneath them lies the stillness of awareness, waiting. The Buddha reminded us, peace comes from within, do not seek it without. This peace that Banks embodied is not something to manufacture. It does not depend on circumstances. It is already here, beneath your judgments, beneath your stories, beneath the surface waves of emotion. It is the ground of your being. Tonight, as you rest in this gentle space, see if you can sense that quiet witness within you, the part of you that has been listening to these stories without grasping, without judging, the part of you that notices your breath without trying to control it. That is your unborn Buddha mind, always present, always at home. And as you rest in that awareness, the breath rising and falling like a tide, another story begins to emerge, one that speaks of beauty, loss, and the freedom of letting go. The burning temple. There once lived a Zen master named Shun, who had dedicated 30 years to building a temple deep in the mountains. Every wooden beam was chosen by his own hands, every nail hammered with devotion. Stones in the gardens were placed one by one in meditative silence, each step a prayer. It was his life's work. Pilgrims journeyed from far-off villages just to walk its winding paths. They said the temple breathed peace, that its silence calmed their restless minds. The roofs curved gracefully against the backdrop of snow-capped peaks. The air smelled of pine and incense. Inside, golden statues of the Buddha smiled softly, their faces glowing in candlelight. In the library, shelves overflowed with scrolls and sutras, each brushstroke crafted by monks who had given their lives to preserving wisdom. The gardens curved like rivers around the temple, lantern-lit at night. their stepping stones smoothed by countless seekers who came to kneel, to weep, to listen. To many, this temple was more than wood and stone. It was a sanctuary, a jewel of the mountains. To Shun, it was the flowering of his heart. 30 years of devotion, manifested in a single, sacred place. The villagers stood in silence before the ruins, their sandals sinking into wet ash. The air still smelled of smoke, mingled with the sharp freshness of rain. Broken beams jutted upward like the ribs of a fallen giant. What had once been a sanctuary now looked like a battlefield: charred wood, shattered tiles, and the faint glow of embers refusing to die. They could not hold back their sorrow. Some wept openly, others whispered prayers under their breath. To them, this temple was not just a building, it was where their children had been blessed at birth, where they had chanted for good harvests, where they had carried candles in honor of their ancestors. It was the place they brought their grief when loved ones passed away, and the place they came to remember that peace was possible, even in a troubled world. And now it was gone. They expected to find Master Shun, crushed by despair, perhaps on his knees among the ruins, ashes streaking his robes, his spirit broken after 30 years of devotion, consumed in a single night. Instead, they found him seated on a large stone at the edge of the courtyard, one of the few pieces of the temple grounds that had survived untouched. He was holding a small clay cup, sipping tea as calmly as if he were watching the sunrise. Steam rose gently from the cup, curling into the cool morning air. His face was serene, not indifferent, but alive with a quiet presence that seemed to embrace both loss and life in the same breath. The villagers could hardly believe what they were seeing. One of them, his voice trembling with grief, finally spoke. "Master, we are so sorry for your terrible loss. 30 years of work destroyed in one night. The temple is gone. All that you built, all that we cherished, reduced to ashes. How can you sit here so peacefully?" Master Shun looked at the smoking ruins for a long while before answering. His eyes were soft, as if he were gazing not at destruction, but at some deeper truth hidden within it. Finally, he placed his cup gently on the stone beside him and said, "Do you not see? The temple was never mine to keep. It was a gift born from time, from wood, from stone, from the hands of many, and from the grace of the mountain itself. Last night, the mountain took back what had always belonged to it. How could I call this loss?" The villagers shifted uneasily. His words seemed too calm, almost impossible to understand. Shun continued, his voice as steady as the mountain beneath them. "For 30 years, this temple stood as a place of peace. For 30 years, it gave shelter, it gave beauty, it gave stillness to countless souls. That gift was never destroyed by fire. Do you think flames can burn away the prayers spoken here? Do you think lightning can reduce to ash the moments of awakening people carried back to their homes? What truly mattered has already been shared, already planted in your hearts, and so nothing has been lost." He paused, lifting his cup again, blowing gently on the steam. "The temple itself has simply returned to impermanence, as all things must. Wood returns to ash, stone to dust, and even our bodies to the earth. But the spirit that animated this place, that still lives." The villagers, still holding their grief, now began to sense something else rising within them. They looked again at the ruins, and though the ash still lay heavy, they began to realize that the temple's true essence had not burned away at all. All those precious scrolls, the sacred statues that seemed to radiate quiet presence, the meditation hall where countless hours of stillness had gathered like invisible incense. "How devastating this must be for you." The villagers spoke in hushed voices, their grief mingling with the faint smell of smoke that still lingered in the air. Sean looked up, His eyes were calm, clear, and gentle, eyes that reflected neither bitterness nor despair, but instead an openness vast enough to hold the tragedy without being consumed by it. With one hand he gestured softly toward the smoldering ruins, the charred remains of what had been a temple of learning and silence, while with the other he held his teacup as steady as if nothing had changed. The fire burned what it burned, he said simply, his voice carrying no trace of resistance. The sadness is sadness. But why should I burn too? The villagers stood in stunned silence, their minds accustomed to clinging and grief, struggled to comprehend how anyone could meet such devastation with such equanimity. To lose not only objects, but a place infused with 30 years of devotion. How could a heart not break entirely? Finally, one young man found the courage to speak. His voice trembled, yet his question carried the weight of all the villagers' hearts. But master, doesn't this hurt? Don't you feel anger about losing everything you built? Sean smiled gently, not to dismiss the young man's concern, but as one who has tasted sorrow and learned to rest within it. He raised the teacup, sipped slowly, and answered, "Of course it hurts. When something beautiful passes away, sadness naturally follows. The ache in the heart is not wrong. It is part of being alive. But if I spend my energy being angry at lightning for being lightning, or fire for being fire, I add unnecessary burning to what is already burned." He rose from his seat, setting the cup carefully upon a blackened stone. His sandals crunched softly over the charred wood as he walked closer to the ruins. The silence deepened. Even the birds seemed to pause their song. "The temple served its purpose beautifully for 30 years, he continued, his hand sweeping gently across the broken timbers and collapsed roof beams. It gave shelter to seekers who longed for truth, peace to troubled hearts who came here in desperation, and beauty to all who stepped into its halls. That service was complete the moment the fire began its work. Why should I torment myself by demanding that it serve me longer than it did?" The villagers listened, their grief slowly softening into something else, something that felt like clarity. "Can you feel the profound wisdom in Master Sean's response?" His words were not polished philosophy, but lived experience. What he embodied was what the Buddha once called the teaching of the two arrows, the distinction between inevitable pain and unnecessary suffering. The Buddha taught, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. The first arrow is life's unavoidable strike, loss, illness, disappointment, aging, death, the endless change that runs through everything we love. These experiences cannot be entirely escaped, nor should they be, for they are part of what it means to live as a human being. But the second arrow, that is our own doing. It is the arrow we launch into our own flesh, our resistance to what has already happened, our fury at reality for being reality, our refusal to let go of the past we wish could have been different. Anger, blame, self-pity, endless mental rehearsal of what cannot be undone. These are wounds we inflict upon ourselves long after the first arrow has struck. Sean stood within the ruins of his temple and met the first arrow honestly. He did not deny that it pierced him. 30 years of devotion and labor had been reduced to ash in a single night, and that pain was real. But he chose not to fire the second arrow. Not resentment, not rage at the unfairness of life, not the heavy weight of why me. Most of us, by contrast, live our entire lives being pierced again and again by arrows of our own making. Someone speaks harshly, and instead of feeling the natural sting of criticism, we carry the wound for days, replaying their words, rehearsing our revenge, feeding the fire of our indignation. A single arrow becomes many. But Master Sean showed another way. He let the first arrow pierce, but he laid down the bow that could have caused a lifetime of unnecessary suffering. We make a mistake at work, and rather than simply acknowledging it, learning from it, and moving on, we often turn the error into a whip with which we lash ourselves again and again. What could have been a moment of growth becomes hours, days, or even weeks of shame and self-criticism. Plans fall through, as plans often do, and instead of adapting gracefully to what is, we fume and sulk over what should have been, wasting our energy arguing with reality itself. The Buddha expressed this truth in a vivid image. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. The coal does not wait for its target. It sears the hand that clings to it. Master Sean understood this perfectly. The temple had already burned. The damage was complete. Why would he add another layer of suffering by burning himself with rage and resistance? To rage at fire for being fire would be like cursing the wind for blowing or the rain for falling. It changes nothing and only deepens the wound. But acceptance, as Sean showed, does not mean passivity or indifference. It does not mean pretending the loss didn't matter or hiding behind a mask of detachment. He felt genuine sadness as he stood before the ruins of his beloved temple. He did not deny the ache of 30 years, reduced to ash, but he also refused to compound that clean pain with the unnecessary torment of wishing it were otherwise. This is the subtle power of the Buddha's teaching on the two arrows. In daily life, the first arrow is always present, the sharp sting of life's unavoidable difficulties. A flat tire on the way to work, a harsh word from someone you love, a disappointing diagnosis. These moments pierce us, and they must be felt. But the second arrow, our refusal, our resentment, our endless replay of what has already happened, is self-inflicted. Consider this. Traffic makes you late for an important meeting. That is the first arrow. It disrupts your plans and may carry real consequences. But the second arrow is the one you fire at yourself when you stew in anger for the rest of the day, condemning the traffic, condemning the city planners, condemning yourself for not leaving earlier. You carry the burn far longer than the moment requires. Or a relationship ends painfully. That heartbreak is the first arrow, sharp, clean, and undeniable. Yet how often do we twist the arrow in deeper by replaying conversations for months, asking endlessly what we should have said differently, nursing bitterness at our former partner? That is the second arrow, the one we alone drive into our own heart. The practice of recognizing these two arrows can quietly transform your relationship with difficulty. When hardship strikes, pause and ask yourself, what is the first arrow here? The pain that cannot be avoided. And what second arrows am I adding through resistance, blame, or self-punishment? Master Sean's tea ceremony among the ruins teaches us this lesson with exquisite clarity. He did not minimize the destruction or pretend nothing had happened, nor did he allow his mind to fan the flames of why me or this should not have been. Instead, he sat with what was real in that moment. A temple had burned down. A cup of tea was still warm in his hand. Between those two truths, he discovered peace. The Buddha also taught, what we resist persists. When we push against what has already happened, we bind ourselves to it, carrying it forward into every moment like a heavy stone in our pocket. But when we accept the first arrow as it is, without adding the second, we make space for healing, for wisdom, and for the possibility of responding with clarity rather than reactivity. Tonight, as you rest in this peaceful moment, you might notice if you are carrying second arrows from your day. Perhaps your mind is still rehearsing an argument, replaying a mistake, or dragging behind it the weight of what could have been. Can you feel the difference between the natural, clean ache of the first arrow, and the smouldering self-imposed fire of the second. Like Master Sean with his simple cup of tea, you too can put down the coal, let go of the bow, and rest in the truth of what is. In that space of quiet acceptance, something extraordinary happens. What first appeared to be an ending reveals itself as the clearing of ground for something new. From the ashes of one moment, another begins to take root. The patient gardener. There once lived a monk named Joshu who would one day be remembered as one of the most beloved Zen masters in history. But his journey did not begin with sudden flashes of enlightenment or dramatic visions. His path unfolded in a way far less spectacular, yet far more extraordinary, through the willingness to learn slowly, patiently, like a gardener who plants seeds and then trusts the seasons, waiting without haste for them to blossom in their own perfect time. When Joshu first arrived at Master Nansen's monastery, he was already 60 years old. At that age, most people were considered elders, expected to share wisdom rather than seek it. But Joshu arrived with empty hands, a beginner's heart, and a humility that astonished those around him. He came not as a man looking back on his life, but as one ready to begin again, proving that the true spirit of practice knows no age. The younger monks whispered among themselves when they saw this unusual newcomer. "Why is that old man here?" they wondered. "Shouldn't he already know what he needs to know by now?" Some pitied him, imagining he must be desperate, perhaps clinging to religion in his final years. Others felt embarrassed on his behalf, thinking it unseemly to start as a novice when his hair was already white. But Joshu paid no attention to their whispers. Each morning, he rose before dawn with the eagerness of a child. He swept the temple floors with such care that each stroke of the broom became its own meditation. He listened to the teacher's lectures with open ears, never pretending to understand more than he did. He asked questions that other monks thought too simple, even foolish, yet he asked them with sincerity, as if nothing in the world were more important than truly knowing the answer. When he sat in meditation, he did not try to force visions or chase after awakening. He simply breathed, patiently, as if he had all the time in the world. Master Nansen watched this unusual student with growing admiration. Many younger monks rushed through their practices, eager for dramatic breakthroughs and eager to be recognized as accomplished practitioners. But Joshu was different. He moved at the pace of the seasons, unhurried, steady, content to let the soil of his heart grow rich through constant tending. Like a gardener kneeling in the earth, he knew that growth comes not through forcing, but through patience, attention, and trust. Years passed. When Joshu was 65, still considered a beginner, many of his contemporaries had already gone off to lead temples of their own. When he was 70, friends from his former life sent word, urging him to return to a comfortable retirement, to spend his remaining years in leisure rather than discipline. When he was 75, even some of his teachers quietly suggested that he rest, that he had already done enough, that perhaps it was time to set aside his student robes. But Joshu only smiled. Each day he rose before dawn. Each day he studied, swept, asked questions, meditated, and listened. And whenever someone pressed him with concern, he would reply with the same words, spoken with the brightness of discovery. "Every day, I discover how much I don't know, and that," he would say, "is the most wonderful discovery of all." One spring morning, when Joshu was nearly 80 years old, a visiting master came to test the students of Nansen's monastery. The monks gathered in the main hall, their robes rustling like waves, as they settled into silence. The visitor began asking sharp, challenging questions about the deepest aspects of Zen teaching. The younger monks leapt to answer, eager to impress. They spoke of emptiness and form, of the nature of mind, of sudden awakening. Their words were polished, their confidence unshakable, but in their eagerness they seemed to be performing rather than revealing. At last the visitor's gaze fell on Joshu, who was sitting quietly in the back, alongside the newest novices. His posture was relaxed, his expression simple, almost as if he had forgotten there was a test at all. The master narrowed his eyes. "Old man," he said, "you have been here longer than most of these young monks. You have studied faithfully for years upon years. Tell me, what profound wisdom have you gained from all this time?" Joshu lifted his head. His eyes sparkled with a delight as fresh as a child, discovering the world for the first time. He bowed gently and said, "Sir, I have learned the most wonderful thing. Every person I meet knows something I do not know." The hall fell silent. Some of the younger monks, who had delivered lofty answers about the nature of reality, now lowered their eyes in shame. For in Joshu's words, there was a humility deeper than all their philosophy, and a wisdom more spacious than all their confidence. In that moment, the visiting master smiled. He recognized that Joshu's patient gardening had borne fruit at last. After 20 years of tending the soil of his heart, Joshu's wisdom had blossomed, not as dazzling knowledge, but as the simple, radiant freshness of a true beginner's mind. Every moment contains a teaching I have not yet received. Even after 20 years of study, I am still just a beginner, and this fills me with joy. The visiting master was stunned into silence. In all his travels across monasteries and temples, in all his encounters with seasoned monks eager to prove their knowledge, he had never heard an answer that carried such humility and such unshakable freshness. It was as if Joshu's words had opened a clear window, letting the spring air sweep through the hall. The younger monks, who moments before had spoken confidently about emptiness, Buddha nature, and the great doctrines of Zen, now shifted uncomfortably. Their cleverness suddenly seemed small beside this old man's simple honesty. In Joshu's few sentences, there was a depth their elaborate answers had never touched. "Tell me," the visitor pressed, his voice soft now, almost reverent, "don't you feel you've wasted time studying so slowly? Most masters achieve enlightenment much younger than you are now." Joshu laughed gently, and his laughter carried through the hall like water flowing over smooth stones. It was not the laughter of ridicule, but the laughter of someone who had discovered a joy deeper than ambition. "Wasted time?" he echoed. "Sir, if I had rushed toward enlightenment as though it were a prize to be seized, I would have plucked the fruit before it was ripe. I would have missed the sweetness that comes only with patience. Time has not been my enemy. Time has been my greatest teacher." That evening, after the visitors had departed and the monastery had grown quiet, Master Nansen called Joshu into his private quarters. The lamp burned low, casting soft light on the old teacher's face. "My old friend," Nansen said, his eyes shining, "you have been my student for 20 years. In all that time, you have never once claimed to fully understand anything. And yet this not knowing of yours is itself complete understanding." From that day onward, everything shifted. Students began seeking Joshu not as a fellow novice, but as a teacher in his own right. They discovered in him something rare, a man who had learned the difference between knowing about wisdom and embodying it. His words did not dazzle like fireworks. They ripened slowly, carrying the fragrance of years lived in patience. When Joshu finally began teaching formally, at the age of 80, his voice carried the weight of seasons. Students traveled for weeks just to sit with him, not because he offered dramatic new insights, but because his very presence revealed the beauty of unhurried growth. Being near him was like sitting beside a great tree, steady, sheltering, quietly alive with timeless strength. One afternoon, A young monk approached him with frustration written all over his face. His voice trembled with despair. "Master Joshu," he said, "I have been practicing diligently for 3 years, but I feel no closer to enlightenment. My mind is restless, my heart unsettled. Perhaps I am not meant for this path. Perhaps I should give up and find something else I am better at." Joshu listened without interruption. When the young man finished, Joshu simply nodded and invited him to walk together in the monastery's garden. They strolled in silence for a while, until Joshu stopped before an ancient pine tree. Its trunk was thick and weathered, its roots gripping the earth with quiet power, its branches stretching toward the sky like arms embracing the clouds. "Tell me," Joshu asked, "how long do you think this tree has been growing?" The student gazed upward, awed by the pine's grandeur. "Perhaps 100 years, he guessed. Joshu shook his head gently. "More than that. This tree has been growing for over 200 years. Year after year, it endured storms, droughts, winters of ice, and summers of blazing sun. It did not rush. It did not despair. It simply grew, patiently, season by season, until it became what you see before you." He turned and looked at the student, with eyes full of kindness. "Do you imagine the tree wasted time because it was not tall in its first year, or because its fruit did not appear after only a few seasons? No, its greatness lies in its patience, in its willingness to take the time it needed to become whole. Why should your practice be any different?" The young monk's eyes filled with tears as he bowed low before the master. In the towering presence of the pine, and in the steady patience of Joshu's words, he felt for the first time that perhaps his struggle was not failure at all, but the slow work of ripening. "Do you think," Joshu asked softly, his hand resting on the bark of the ancient pine, "that this tree ever felt frustrated because it wasn't tall enough after only 3 years? Do you imagine it ever considered giving up because it wasn't growing fast enough?" The young monk lowered his eyes, a smile tugging at his lips as the lesson began to take root. He shook his head. The master's voice was steady, carrying both kindness and authority. "Then why should you measure yourself so harshly? Growth does not bloom all at once. It unfolds in its own time." The student bowed his head. "But master, how do I learn to be as patient as a tree?" Joshu's eyes sparkled, and he gestured to the sky, the earth, the tree that towered above them. "By remembering that you are not racing against time," he said, "you are dancing with it." He paused, letting the words sink in, before continuing. "The Buddha said, 'Drop by drop is the water pot filled.' Wisdom does not arrive like a flood overwhelming the banks of a river. It comes in drops, gentle, steady, each one precious. In time, the drops become a stream, and the stream becomes a river, and the river, without hurry, reaches the ocean." Can you feel the profound peace in Joshu's approach to learning? In a world that demands instant results, quick fixes, and dramatic transformations, he discovered the quiet joy of slow, steady growth. He knew that rushing toward enlightenment is like forcing a flower to open before it is ready. You may succeed in tearing its petals apart, but in doing so, you destroy the beauty of its natural unfolding. Most of us, however, treat time as an adversary. We grow frustrated when changes don't happen quickly enough, anxious when progress doesn't match our imagined timeline, and discouraged when growth feels invisible. We complain at the pace of our own becoming, as if patience were a weakness rather than one of the greatest strengths we could cultivate. But Joshu had discovered something wonderful. When we stop fighting against the rhythm of time, we begin to flow with it. Instead of feeling rushed or pressured, we relax into the truth that everything worthwhile requires space to ripen. The sweetest fruit, the tallest trees, the deepest wisdom, none of these appear overnight. They take seasons, storms, and sunlight to mature. The Buddha taught there are two mistakes one can make along the road to truth: not going all the way and not starting. Joshu's story reveals a third mistake, one often overlooked: rushing so quickly toward the destination that we miss the beauty of the journey itself. Think about the areas of your own life where impatience stirs within you. Perhaps you feel restless with how slowly you are learning a new skill. Perhaps you feel disappointed that a relationship is not transforming as quickly as you had hoped. Perhaps you feel discouraged because your personal healing, your growth, or your practice seems to take forever. In those moments, remember Joshu's lesson beneath the pine. You are not in a race with time. You are in a dance with it. Joshu would remind you that impatience itself is something to be patient with. Just as a gardener does not pull up seedlings to check whether their roots are growing, we too must learn to trust what cannot yet be seen. Progress often hides beneath the soil of our lives, unfolding quietly in places our eyes cannot reach. In Japanese gardens, there is a principle known as shake, borrowed scenery. It is the art of incorporating distant mountains, faraway trees, or the horizon itself into the design of the garden. Beauty is not limited to what we control with our hands. It includes what lies beyond us, what cannot be arranged or forced. Joshu lived by this principle. He understood that his spiritual journey was not only about what he could will into being, but also about what was naturally unfolding in its own perfect timing. He had learned to trust the seasons of his life. The Buddha once said, "Patience is bitter, but its fruit is sweet." Joshu tasted this sweetness daily through the long decades of his practice. His joy was not only in reaching some distant goal of enlightenment, but in savoring the process of ripening itself. When we stop demanding immediate results, we begin to discover something astonishing. The process itself is beautiful. The act of tending, of waiting, of showing up day after day with an open heart. This is where wisdom blooms. Tonight, as you rest in this quiet moment, perhaps you can feel a little of Joshu's patient acceptance settling into your own bones. Whatever you are working on, healing, learning, growing, changing, can you trust that it is unfolding exactly as it needs to? Can you stop racing against time and instead make friends with it? This does not mean becoming passive or giving up your efforts. Joshu studied diligently every single day for 20 years, but he did so with the gentle joy of a gardener, knowing that seeds planted with care will sprout only when the conditions are right. Sometimes the most profound teachings arrive in the simplest packages, waiting quietly until our eyes and hearts are ready to notice their extraordinary beauty. The simple tea. There once lived a Zen master named Ikkyu, known throughout Japan not for grand temples or elaborate rituals, but for his quiet disregard of anything unnecessary. While other monks displayed their finest robes when visitors arrived, Ikkyu was often seen in the garden, wearing clothes so patched and faded that beggar might have pitied him, and yet his simple presence carried more peace than 100 golden statues. Ikkyu lived in a tiny hut on the outskirts of a bustling city. His home contained almost nothing: a thin sleeping mat, a few bowls, a handful of writing brushes, and a small iron kettle for making tea. Visitors who had traveled far to meet the famous master often expected a dwelling filled with relics, scrolls, or fine treasures. Instead, they found a space so bare it seemed to breathe with contentment. This simplicity was not poverty, it was choice. Ikkyu had grown up in the imperial court, surrounded by luxury and ceremony. He knew the heavy weight of silk robes, the rich taste of elaborate feasts, and the endless exhaustion of maintaining appearances. But somewhere along his wandering path, he had discovered that the most precious things in life could not be bought, displayed, or impressed upon others. One spring morning, a royal messenger arrived at EQ's humble hut, bearing an elegant scroll sealed in gold. The emperor himself was hosting a grand banquet to honor the nation's most respected spiritual teachers, and EQ was among the chosen guests. The messenger, draped in elaborate court attire, surveyed the bare little hut with poorly concealed disdain. "Master EQ," he said formally, "His Imperial Majesty requests your presence at tomorrow evening's feast. This is a rare honor, reserved only for the most esteemed teachers in the realm." EQ accepted the invitation with a gentle bow, but his heart remained calm. He felt no stirrings of excitement for such grandeur. Still, he knew that declining might appear ungrateful, and he was curious to see what teaching this experience might reveal. The next evening, EQ walked to the palace gates. He wore his ordinary robe, a simple garment of rough brown cloth, clean but well worn, its fabric patched in several places with patient care. His sandals were made of straw, and in his hand he carried only a small cloth bag containing a few tea leaves. When he arrived, the palace guards looked him up and down with disbelief. "Surely this shabby figure cannot be one of the honored guests," one guard whispered. Another stepped forward, his tone polite but firm. "Old man, this entrance is for invited dignitaries. The servants' gate is around the back." EQ only smiled and held out the golden sealed scroll. The guards examined it carefully, their eyes flicking between the emperor's invitation and the ragged monk who stood before them. Embarrassment crept into their voices. "Master, this is most irregular. Perhaps you might return home and change into more suitable attire for so noble an occasion." EQ bowed deeply, as if the suggestion were perfectly reasonable. "I see the problem," he said softly. Without the slightest irritation, he turned and walked away. The guards thought they had seen the last of him, but less than an hour later, a magnificent figure appeared at the palace gates. This time, EQ was clothed in robes of the finest silk, embroidered with golden threads that shimmered like fire in the torchlight. His sleeves were long and flowing, moving like drifting clouds as he walked. On his head sat a jeweled cap of rare design, and on his feet, sandals of expensive lacquered wood. The guards, stunned by the transformation, bowed low and opened the gates with haste. The hall fell into silence. Even the musicians lowered their instruments, their notes hanging unfinished in the air. The emperor leaned forward, his jeweled crown catching the torchlight. For a moment, his stern face softened into something like wonder. EQ continued, his voice calm but filled with unmistakable clarity. "When I arrived earlier in the garments I wear every day, I was not seen. The guards did not recognize the worth of a human being beyond what is stitched into his sleeves. But when I clothed myself in these silks, suddenly I was honored, bowed to, escorted inside, and seated at the head table." He lifted a piece of fish delicately, placing it once more against the embroidered fabric of his sleeve. "So it is only fitting that the food should go to the robes, for it is not my heart that has been welcomed here. It is the shimmering fabric, the glittering threads. Tell me, should not these robes now enjoy the feast in my place?" A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the hall. Some guests lowered their eyes in shame, while others nodded in sudden recognition of the truth behind the absurd gesture. The emperor, struck by the boldness of the act, finally spoke. "Master EQ, your teaching has reached us more deeply than 1,000 sermons. Tonight, we have learned that honor built on clothing and appearances is an empty honor. It blinds us to the treasure of simple wisdom that may come dressed in rags." EQ bowed, his patched sleeves dripping with soup, a playful smile flickering at the corners of his mouth. "Majesty, appearances are nothing more than smoke. When we mistake the smoke for the fire, we miss the warmth that truly nourishes us. From that evening on, the story of EQ, feeding his robes, spread throughout the land. Some retold it with laughter, others with reverence, but all felt the sting of its truth. And EQ, returning to his tiny hut with nothing more than a mat, a kettle, and a few tea leaves, lived on in contentment, reminding anyone who visited that simplicity itself is the greatest banquet. His small hut wasn't a limitation, it was freedom, a space uncluttered by distractions, where every object had its place, and every moment felt wide enough for peace. The sleeping mat became softer because it was all he needed. The single iron kettle became a treasure because it was always used with care. Even the patched robe became a symbol of wholeness, not despite the mending, but because of it. EQ's life revealed a truth that often hides in plain sight. Abundance is not about how much we own, but how deeply we appreciate what is already in our hands. His joy wasn't found in adding more layers to life, but in peeling them away until only the essential remained. Can you imagine what it would feel like to live like this? To sit in your own room, surrounded not by endless piles of things, but by a few simple objects that truly serve you. To eat a meal not rushed and distracted, but savored fully, each bite a small celebration. The Buddha taught, to live content with little is the greatest wealth. EQ embodied this teaching with every breath. His lesson at the banquet was not just for the emperor and nobles of his time. It is for us too, living in a world overflowing with noise, possessions, and endless demands to prove our worth. The robes at the palace were beautiful, but they carried no wisdom. The patched robe in EQ's hut carried the fragrance of years of practice, humility, and joy. Which of these, he asked, without words, truly deserves our honor? Tonight, as you reflect on this story, notice the robes you wear in your own life. The clothes, the titles, the possessions, the ways you try to appear valuable in the eyes of others. None of these are wrong, but they are costume. Beneath them all is the simple, awake presence that is your true wealth. Can you rest for a moment in that deeper value, the one that needs no gold thread, no recognition, no proof? Like EQ sitting quietly in his hut, can you taste the richness of enough? In your daily life, notice when you feel the pull toward unnecessary complexity. It may appear as the restless desire to upgrade, to compare, to keep pace with others who seem to have more. Or it may appear as subtle pressure, the nagging thought that who you are is not quite enough unless it is decorated with the right clothing, home, or title. EQ's story invites us to pause and gently ask, what am I really serving, my life, or my image of life? Simplicity, after all, is not about austerity or denial. It is about alignment. When we strip away what is false or unnecessary, what remains is not less, it is more. More peace, more clarity, more direct contact with the miracle of this moment. Think of the last time you were with a true friend. Did their presence feel valuable because of what they wore, or because of the warmth of their laughter, the steadiness of their listening, the way you could simply be yourself without pretense? This is the kind of wealth EQ treasured, a richness that requires no ornament to shine. The Buddha compared this way of living to crossing a river. Most of us, he said, run back and forth along the near shore, chasing after what sparkles but never satisfies. Only a few discover the strength to step into the current and let it carry them to the far bank, where peace is not dependent on possessions or appearances. EQ, with his patched robe and empty hut, had crossed to that far shore. Yet notice he did not condemn the palace, the silk, or the fine food. He simply showed that these things, while beautiful, are not the true feast. What nourishes us most deeply is presence itself, contentment unshaken by what comes or goes. Tonight, perhaps you might look around your own space. Instead of asking, "What do I still need?" you might ask, "What can I let go of? What is already enough?" Feel the subtle shift when your heart moves from striving to resting, from comparison to appreciation. EQ's patched robe was enough. His tea kettle was enough. His own presence, unadorned and awake, was more than enough. And so is yours. Ryoan clapped his hands together with enthusiasm. "What a wonderful idea," he said. "But I must warn you, I have been practicing my hiding skills for more than 50 years. You might not find me so easily." The children burst into giggles at the thought of an old monk crouching behind trees and bushes, but they eagerly agreed to the game. "Close your eyes and count to 20, Ryoan said, "and no peeking." As soon as the children covered their eyes, he leapt to his feet with surprising agility. He tiptoed toward the far side of his hut, then darted behind a row of tall bamboo stalks. For a moment he crouched there, chuckling quietly to himself, savoring the thrill of play. "Ready or not, here we come," the children shouted in unison. They scattered in every direction, peeking under bushes, searching behind rocks, and even climbing onto the porch of his hut. Their laughter rang through the summer air like temple bells carried by the wind. When at last one sharp-eyed boy spotted a corner of Ryoan's robe peeking out from the bamboo, the group swarmed him with shouts of victory. "You found me," Ryoan exclaimed with mock disappointment, throwing up his hands. "Clearly, my years of practice have not been enough. I'll have to keep training harder." The children squealed with delight as he joined their laughter, his eyes sparkling like a child's. For the rest of the afternoon, they played game after game, hide and seek, tag, and even rolling down the grassy hillside until they were dizzy with joy. When at last the sun began to sink and the children were called home, Ryoan walked them part way down the path, listening carefully as each one told him about their day. He bowed to them as if they were honored guests, sending them off with a smile that seemed to make the fading light glow brighter. That evening, a group of monks from the main temple visited Ryoan. They had heard about his playful reputation and were puzzled. "Brother," one of them said, "you are a monk of great learning. Why waste your precious hours playing children's games? Shouldn't you be devoting yourself to serious study and deep meditation?" Ryoan simply looked at them with eyes full of kindness. "My dear friends," he said softly, "when I play with the children, I am studying joy. When I listen to their stories, I am meditating on innocence. When I laugh with them, I am practicing the deepest compassion. Tell me, what teaching could be more serious than this?" The children's voices rose and fell in the distance like waves crashing and retreating. "Uncle Ryoan," shouted May, her voice tinged with both laughter and frustration. "Where are you hiding?" called Taro, his whistle of missing teeth turning the words into a playful song. Ryoan, curled quietly behind the rain barrel, pressed a hand over his mouth to keep from chuckling. He felt the cool wood against his back and the faint scent of damp earth rising from the shaded ground. In the stillness, as he listened to the children's frantic footsteps, he noticed how alive everything was, the cicadas singing in the pines, the faint trickle of water from the bamboo spout, the rustling of robes as he shifted his weight slightly. Time seemed to slow. He remembered being a small boy himself, hiding from friends in village games, his heart pounding with anticipation. Decades had passed, yet here he was again, heart racing with the same excitement. He thought, how strange, how beautiful, that something so simple never loses its magic. Meanwhile, the children searched everywhere, under the porch, inside the shed, even peeking into his tiny hut, convinced he must have slipped inside when they weren't looking. He's vanished, Kenji declared dramatically, throwing up his hands. Maybe he used monk magic to disappear, another child explained. Finally, May gathered the group together. Her face was serious, though her eyes twinkled. "We can't give up," she said. "Uncle Ryoan wouldn't want us to stop trying. Let's all search together." The children fanned out again, their laughter ringing louder now. Ryoan could feel their determination, and for a moment he thought of staying hidden until they truly gave up. But then a new thought came to him. Perhaps this, too, is a chance to teach without teaching. So, when the children came running past the barrel again, Ryoan suddenly leapt out with a loud. The group erupted in squeals, some falling onto the grass in exaggerated shock, others clapping their hands in delight. Taro was laughing so hard he could barely speak. "You tricked us, Uncle Ryoan. We were sure you had disappeared into the sky." Ryoan laughed with them, his eyes sparkling. "Ah," he said, "you almost discovered the great secret of monks. We do not vanish. We simply become very, very good at being still." The children looked at him with wide eyes. "What do you mean?" May asked. Ryoan crouched down to their level, his robe brushing against the grass. "When you sit very still, without moving, without making noise, the world changes. You begin to hear things you never noticed before. The song of the birds, the wind in the trees, even your own heartbeat. To be still is to become invisible, not because you disappear, but because you begin to blend with everything around you." The children were silent for a rare moment, letting his words sink in. Then Kenji whispered, almost reverently, "That's kind of like magic." Ryoan smiled gently. "Yes, but it is not the magic of monks. It is the magic you already carry inside you." The children gasped.
What?
Taro exclaimed, eyes wide. "That's impossible. We searched everywhere." Ryoan chuckled softly, setting down his brush. "Yes, you searched everywhere, everywhere outside yourselves. But sometimes the most hidden treasure is not far away. It is right beside you, waiting to be noticed." The children crowded closer, still baffled. Kenji squinted suspiciously. "But Uncle Ryoan, how could you stay hidden for so long? Even after we left, didn't you get bored or lonely?" Ryoan smiled, his gaze drifting toward the mountains bathed in morning light. "Ah, my little teachers, let me tell you a secret. When you become very still, so still that you stop chasing after the next laugh, the next noise, the next thought, you discover a world so full that boredom disappears. The barrel, the wind, the stars, the cool earth beneath me, they all became my companions. I wasn't lonely. I was completely surrounded by life." May tilted her head thoughtfully. "So, hiding was like playing a different kind of game." "Yes," Ryoan said, "a game of stillness. You see, you were searching for me outside, but I was discovering the joy of being hidden inside. And in that hiding, I realized something. Love doesn't always mean running toward people, speaking, or doing. Sometimes love is simply being so present, so open, that even silence is full of connection." The children grew quiet. For once, no giggles or interruptions came. They felt something ripple through the monk's words, something they couldn't quite explain, but could somehow sense. Finally, Taro whispered, "So, when we play hide and seek, we can also practice being still." Ryoan's eyes sparkled. "Exactly. Every hiding place can become a little meditation hut. When you crouch behind a tree or curl into a corner, try listening. Feel the ground. Notice your breath. In that moment, you will discover that the whole universe is hiding with you." The children sat in silence for a moment longer, each one secretly imagining their next hiding place, transformed into a temple. Then, as children do, the spell broke with laughter, and they begged Uncle Ryoen to play again. Ryoen nodded, his heart light, for in their games, he saw not just play, but the seeds of awakening. And perhaps you too can feel it, this truth hidden within a simple childhood game. Stillness is not emptiness. Silence is not absence. To hide well is to discover what has always been here, a love so quiet, so vast, it fills even the spaces we think are empty. It flows naturally, quietly, and without calculation. True kindness doesn't keep score. It doesn't ask, who noticed, who thanked me, what did I gain? It simply radiates, like sunlight warming both stone and flower, without discrimination. Ryoen's gentle heart had discovered this secret. The children's laughter and concern were not small things to him, they were sacred offerings. Even as he sat hidden behind an old barrel, he felt bathed in their love. Their calls of Uncle Ryoen, where are you, became mantras of affection, echoing in the evening air. This is why his night of hiding was not loneliness, but communion. He understood that love is not confined to touch, words, or physical presence. It can be felt across distances, even in silence, even when unseen. Think about your own life. How often do you withhold kindness because you're afraid it won't be noticed, appreciated, or returned? How often do you close your heart out of fear of being misunderstood, ignored, or taken for granted? The Buddha compared compassion to a mother's love for her only child, a love so vast it does not pause to calculate fairness or recognition. Ryoen embodied this spirit, not through grand gestures, but through the simplicity of joining children in play, through the willingness to let even a game of hide and seek become a teaching in love. His night behind the barrel reminds us, real compassion isn't fragile. It doesn't vanish when unseen. It sustains itself because it flows from the inexhaustible well of our true nature. Perhaps tonight as you rest, you can feel this same compassion quietly glowing within you. Not the strained effort to be a good person, but the effortless tenderness that arises when you drop your guard and simply allow yourself to care. It may begin small, a smile offered to a stranger, patience with a loved one, a gentle thought for yourself. But like Ryoen's hiding place, what begins as something small can open into boundless peace. They came with questions heavy as mountains, their minds burdened with the weight of philosophy and longing. They asked, what is the nature of the mind? What is Buddha? What is the essence of truth? Dongshan would listen quietly, his face calm as still water, and when the moment was ripe, he would respond with words so simple, they seemed almost absurd. To one student who asked, what is Buddha? He replied, 3 pounds of flax. At first the student was bewildered. He had expected a lofty teaching, not a reference to something so ordinary, a bundle of rough fibers used for weaving. But Dongshan knew exactly what he was doing. With those 3 words, he cut through the student's expectation, like a sword slicing silk. He revealed a truth that could not be contained in concepts or grand explanations, that Buddha is not separate from the everyday. Buddha is not hidden in distant temples, nor locked inside complicated doctrines. Buddha is right here, in the mundane, in the overlooked, in the plain weight of flax resting in a merchant's stall. Zen thrives in this way of pointing directly, overturning our search for something exotic or extraordinary. It whispers, look again, the truth you seek has been under your nose all along. How often do we miss the sacred by looking for it in the wrong places? We chase after peak experiences, dramatic revelations, glittering signs that promise enlightenment. But like Dongshan's flax, awakening waits for us in the texture of our daily lives, in the warmth of a teacup, in the sound of sweeping a floor, in the steady rhythm of breath. The Buddha once said, the miracle is not to walk on water, the miracle is to walk on the earth. Dongshan's 3 pounds of flax remind us of this same miracle, that the sacred is woven into the fabric of the ordinary, waiting to be noticed. Master, the student pressed on, his brow furrowed. If everything has Buddha nature, then where do I find it? In scriptures, in meditation, in the mind, in emptiness itself. Dongshan lifted a bundle of flax and placed it carefully on the scale. The beam dipped, then steadied. 3 pounds, he said simply. The student blinked in confusion. Master, forgive me, but perhaps you didn't hear. I was asking about ultimate reality, not about weights and measures. Dongshan looked at him kindly, his eyes soft but steady.
I heard you, he said.
3 pounds of flax. The monk stood frozen, unsure whether his teacher was teasing him or dismissing him. He wanted to protest, to ask again in different words, to pull out all the clever arguments he had collected in his years of study. But something in the old master's calm presence silenced him. The flax gave off its simple fragrance, dry and earthy. The afternoon sunlight slanted across the room, turning the dust motes into tiny stars. The old wooden scale creaked again as Dongshan adjusted the weight, and in that moment, the monk felt a shift. The question that had tormented him suddenly dissolved into the ordinariness of this scene. The smell of flax, the golden light, the quiet focus of his master. He realized that Buddha nature wasn't hiding in a distant heaven of concept. It was right here, in the 3 pounds of flax on the scale, in the weight of this moment that required no explanation. Dongshan said no more. He didn't need to. The silence between them was the true teacher. Later, when the student wrote about that day, he didn't describe a doctrine or a theory. He simply wrote, "When I asked about Buddha nature, my master said, 3 pounds of flax. In that answer, I understood more than in all my years of study." Zen teachings often sound puzzling from the outside, but for those who listen deeply, they are doors. And Dongshan's door was woven from flax and sunlight, opening into a truth so simple that words could never contain it. The flax fibers slipped between Dongshan's fingers, catching the sunlight in delicate threads. The young monk frowned. "Master, I thought Buddha nature was beyond things, beyond wood, beyond plants, beyond matter. Isn't it supposed to be pure, formless, infinite?" Dongshan chuckled softly, the sound like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "And where will you find this formless infinite, if not here, in form? If you reject the flax, the scale, the light, where will Buddha nature dwell?" The student opened his mouth, then closed it again. His years of study rose up like a wall of words, then crumbled just as quickly. Dongshan continued, 3 pounds of flax, not more, not less. That is its true nature. If you look for Buddha outside this, you chase a shadow. If you cannot see Buddha here, you will not see Buddha anywhere. The monk's shoulders slumped. He whispered, almost to himself, "So, all this time I was searching for something that was never missing." Dongshan nodded, returning calmly to his work. Exactly, like a man standing in the middle of a river, dying of thirst. Silence filled the room, the creak of the scale, the hum of insects outside, the simple weight of flax. All of it seemed to pulse with quiet aliveness. For the first time, the student stopped thinking about Buddha nature as an idea to grasp. He simply felt it. In the texture of the flax, in the rough grain of the wooden table beneath his hand, in the warmth of his own breath rising and falling. Dongshan placed another bundle on the scale and smiled. 3 pounds of flax. Remember that well. It will follow you your whole life, like your own shadow in sunlight. Perhaps you're sitting in meditation, waiting for a lightning bolt of awakening, while missing the quiet miracle of simply breathing. We convince ourselves that truth must be hidden, rare, or extraordinary, but in doing so we step right over the sacred ground beneath our feet. Dongshan's 3 pounds of flax is like a bell sounding across the centuries, calling us back from our endless searching. It reminds us that reality doesn't need to be improved or transformed before it shines. Nothing ordinary exists. What you call ordinary is already radiant if you know how to look. The young monk, standing in that room with his teacher, suddenly realized he had been chasing an idea of enlightenment while ignoring the living reality of flax, sunlight, scale, breath, heartbeat. His great question was answered not by explanation, but by a simple pointer to what was already there. That is why Zen masters often speak in riddles, paradoxes, or startlingly plain words. They are not being obscure, they are stripping away the veil of your expectations. They know the mind wants grand visions, but reality only offers itself in this: a sound, a sight, a taste, a touch, a breath. Consider your own life. How often do you overlook what is simple because you are waiting for what is special? The smile of a friend, the steam rising from a cup of tea, the warmth of sunlight across your skin. These are not distractions from awakening. They are awakening, appearing in forms so ordinary, we dismiss them. Dongshan would say, 3 pounds of flax, nothing more, nothing less. Enough to clothe a monk, enough to reveal the entire universe. The Buddha nature you seek is not elsewhere. It is not later. It is this moment, unadorned and alive. The old master received each visitor with genuine delight, as if every meeting were the first, and every farewell complete in itself. He never allowed the shadow of death to turn his presence heavy. Instead, he laughed easily, teased gently, and listened deeply. To those who came burdened by grief at the thought of losing him, he offered not solemn speeches, but small gestures, pouring tea, adjusting a flower in a vase, commenting on the play of clouds over the mountains. Through these ordinary acts, he showed what he had taught all his life, that wisdom lives not in lofty words, but in simple, unguarded presence. One afternoon, as golden leaves drifted softly in the monastery courtyard, a devoted student knelt beside him. "Master," the student whispered, "you have guided us with such compassion. Please, before you leave this world, give us one final teaching." Iku smiled, his face a landscape of countless seasons, his eyes alive with their familiar sparkle. "What teaching do you still lack?" he replied. "The sound of wind in the bamboo, the taste of rice, the warmth of friendship. Have these not been teaching you all along?" Still, the students pressed him, longing for some parting words they could treasure. The old master nodded, and over the following days, he began composing short poems, each as simple as a falling leaf. He wrote of crickets in the night, of the moon reflected in a puddle, of the joy of laughing with children, of the stillness of dawn before the temple bell. None of these poems tried to explain death. They only pointed, gently, to love. As his final day approached, Iku gathered his students close. With deliberate slowness, he took up a brush, one last time. His hand trembled slightly, but his spirit was steady, flowing through the ink as naturally as breath. On the paper he wrote, "This body is a guest house. I have stayed long enough. The host has been kind. Now I bow and depart." He set the brush down, gazed once more at the autumn hills, and laughed, a clear, joyful laugh that startled the crows from the trees. Then, without struggle or regret, he closed his eyes and was gone. His students wept, but they also remembered his laughter, his sparkle, his simplicity. They realized that his final poem was not only about death, but about every moment of life. Each moment is a guest house. We arrive, we stay, briefly, and we move on. What matters is not the length of the stay, but the depth of our gratitude and the fullness of our presence. And so Master Iku's last teaching was the same as his first: to live with playfulness, to love with openness, and to bow with gratitude when the time comes to depart. On the third evening, as the sun slipped behind the mountains and painted the autumn sky in soft purples and pinks, Iku called his closest students to gather around his bedside. His breathing was slower now, but steady, like the rhythm of waves lapping on a distant shore. The room glowed with the last light of day, and outside, the cicadas began their evening song. The students leaned close, waiting for the long-anticipated final teaching. Their ink brushes hovered above the waiting paper, ready to capture words they imagined would become timeless scripture. But when Iku opened his mouth, what came out was neither lofty nor complicated. He looked at them with eyes as clear as mountain water and said, "Do not waste this life." Then he chuckled softly, as if amused by their startled expressions. "Drink your tea while it is warm. Look at the moon while it is full. Listen when someone speaks. And when it is time to go, go like the autumn leaves." The students scribbled quickly, but Iku waved his hand. "Do not cling even to my words. They are only leaves too. What matters is the tree itself." His thin hand lifted and gestured toward the garden, where the maple branches swayed gently in the twilight breeze. Silence filled the hut. The students felt tears rising, but Iku's serenity steadied them. He had always taught them that life and death are not opposites, but two movements of the same great river. And now, in his final hours, he was embodying that truth more clearly than any poem or lecture could. Later that night, when the moon was high and silver light filled the room, Iku reached for his brush one last time. With a calm, deliberate hand, he wrote a few lines. "Autumn sky fading." The guest bows deeply, smiling. "Thank you, dear host." He set the brush down, folded his hands together, and looked once more at the faces of his beloved students. His eyes shone with playful brightness, as though he were about to tell one last mischievous joke. Instead, he simply whispered, "How wonderful," and exhaled his final breath as gently as a candle going out. The hut grew quiet. The students sat in stillness, watching their master's body rest in peace, while his spirit seemed to linger in the cool mountain air, in the rustling leaves, in the moonlight that touched everything with silver. They realized that his final teaching had not been in his words, but in the way he departed, lightly, freely, without resistance, like a leaf returning to the soil. For years afterward, whenever autumn came and maple leaves fell, the students would remember Iku's final smile, and in their own moments of letting go, they would hear his voice. "Drink your tea. Look at the moon. Go like the leaves." "I have lived my life like that donkey," Iku said softly, his voice carrying both mischief and truth, doing what came naturally in each moment, without trying to be spiritual or profound. "When hungry, I ate. When tired, I slept. When moved by beauty, I wrote poems. When asked a question, I answered with what was right in front of me. Nothing more, nothing less." The students leaned in, their hearts torn between reverence and confusion. They had expected verses to echo through centuries, words polished like jewels. Instead, their master offered them the image of a blind donkey chewing grass in a field. One student whispered, "But master, is that enough? Is such a simple life truly the teaching?" Iku's smile deepened, his wrinkled face glowing in the lamplight. "Enough? It is more than enough. The donkey doesn't need to understand the grass in order to eat it. The stars do not ask why they shine. The stream does not study books about flowing. It simply flows, Why should a human life be any different? The hut fell silent. Outside, the wind moved gently through the maples, scattering a few more crimson leaves to the earth. Do not waste your time searching for extraordinary truths, he continued. Truth is already grazing quietly in the field of your life. To live like the donkey is to live without resistance, without endless comparisons, without the exhausting burden of becoming someone else. It is to trust the simplicity of being alive. The student's eyes filled with tears. Some laughed through them because they suddenly saw what he meant. All their years of studying sutras, chasing enlightenment, longing for perfect words. Yet their teacher in his final moment had given them something both humbler and greater, permission to live naturally, honestly, and fully. EQ closed his eyes once more. If you remember me, he whispered, remember not the poems, not the teachings, not even this moment. Remember only the blind donkey eating grass. That is my death poem, and my life poem, too. His hand rested peacefully by his side. The ink on the paper glistened in the lantern light, and the students understood, some immediately, others only years later, that their master's final words were not meant to be studied or decoded, but lived. Think about your own relationship with change and endings. How often do you resist the truth of impermanence? Do you cling to relationships, possessions, or even identities as if they could remain fixed forever? Do you find yourself anxious at the thought of loss, or quietly hoping that the stream of life might somehow pause at a particularly pleasant bend? IQ's final teaching invites us into another way of seeing. Endings are not interruptions to life. They are part of life itself. The last note of a song gives the music its meaning. The final brushstroke completes the painting. The setting sun makes the day whole. Without endings, nothing could be beautiful, because beauty depends on its fleetingness. Can you notice how impermanence is what allows life to be precious? The flower that blooms forever would never astonish us. The meal that never ended would cease to satisfy. The embrace that never loosened would become a prison. It is the very fact that things pass that makes them shine. EQ understood this deeply. His laughter, his poems, his kindness to children, his simple robe, his tea ceremonies, all of them were lived in the awareness that nothing lasts, and that this is not cause for despair, but for gratitude. His blind donkey, munching grass without pretense or philosophy, represents the wisdom of living naturally within this impermanence, neither resisting nor dramatizing it. And so, when his time came, EQ met death in the same spirit with which he had met life. With simplicity, honesty, and a playful smile. His passing was not a failure, not a tragedy, but the natural conclusion of a life lived awake. Tonight, as you rest, can you let go just a little of your resistance to endings? Can you feel the peace that comes when you stop demanding permanence from what is, by nature, transient? Can you recognize that the impermanence you fear is the same impermanence that gives every moment its unrepeatable beauty? This is the gift of EQ's final poem, not a clever riddle, not an elaborate philosophy, but a reminder as humble and natural as a donkey eating grass. Life is enough, just as it is, for as long as it is. The seeking mind. There lived a Zen master named Huang Po, whose teaching was so direct and uncompromising that students often left his presence either completely awakened or completely bewildered. He did not dress his words in gentle encouragement or long explanations. His style was like a sudden clap of thunder, startling, impossible to ignore, and often clearing the air in an instant. Huang Po had no patience for spiritual seeking that turned into yet another form of grasping. If a student came to him with elaborate theories, He would dismiss them with a wave of the hand. If someone begged him for methods or practices to reach enlightenment, he would tell them bluntly that their very seeking was the obstacle. Many found this approach too harsh, but those who stayed long enough began to sense the compassion hidden within his sharpness. His monastery became famous across the empire, attracting seekers who had exhausted themselves chasing after truths in sutras, rituals, and pilgrimages. They came hoping Huang Po would finally give them the missing key. Yet what they found was not the gentle guidance of gradual practice, but the unyielding presence of a teacher who refused to support their illusions for even a moment. Unlike other masters who encourage progress step by step, Huang Po had a reputation for cutting through years of accumulated effort with a single, devastating insight. His words could feel like being stripped bare, yet in that very bareness, some students discovered the freedom they had been chasing all their lives. One autumn day, a young monk who had studied diligently for over a decade approached Huang Po. His head was full of scripture, his memory sharp with hundreds of teachings, and yet his heart remained restless. Bowing deeply, he confessed, "Master, I have searched tirelessly. I have practiced meditation until my body aches. I have memorized the sutras until my mind feels like an overflowing library. I have begged the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas for blessings, yet I still feel incomplete. Please, what is the true path to awakening?" Huang Po looked at him steadily, his expression unreadable. Then, without hesitation, he raised his staff and brought it down sharply on the floor beside him with a loud crack that echoed through the hall. The monk jumped, startled by the sudden noise. "There," Huang Po said firmly, "that is the path." The monk blinked in confusion. "But master, I don't understand. That was only a sound, only a moment." "Exactly," Huang Po replied, "and in that very moment, everything you seek was already present. Who was it that heard the sound? Where was the gap between the sound and awareness? Show me where Buddha was absent in that instant." The young monk opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, the endless stream of concepts deserted him. He felt himself thrown back into the raw immediacy of the moment. The sharp sound, the shock in his body, the awareness that had registered it without effort. Huang Po watched him silently. Then, with piercing clarity, he said, "Stop seeking, stop clinging to what you already are. The more you chase Buddha, the further away you push it. What you call your seeking mind is itself the barrier. Let it fall, and what remains is what you've been searching for." Many came to Huang Po hoping he would validate their practices. Most left having those very practices dismantled before their eyes, as if the floor had been pulled out from under them. One spring morning, a young monk appeared at the monastery gate after walking for 3 months across jagged mountain ranges and through valleys filled with danger. His feet were blistered and raw, his robes threadbare, and his face carried the gaunt intensity of someone who had spent his whole life chasing an invisible horizon. He introduced himself as Wyan. Wyan carried letters of recommendation from respected abbots, and word of his sincerity had preceded him. For 15 years he had studied with renowned teachers across the empire. He had memorized countless sutras, mastered the intricacies of meditation, endured hunger, storms, and sleepless nights in pursuit of awakening. If anyone could be called a devoted seeker, it was him. Yet despite all his efforts, a gnawing emptiness remained. The closer he thought he came to the truth, the more distant it seemed to drift away. Finally granted an audience with Huang Po, Wei entered the dim hall where the master was seated, in silence. The young monk fell to his knees, touched his forehead to the floor 3 times, and with trembling hands offered the bundle of credentials he had carried across mountains and rivers. Venerable teacher, Wayan said, voice thick with exhaustion and hope. I have come to you as my last refuge. I have studied under the greatest masters, practiced the most advanced disciplines, and given every breath of my life to the search for enlightenment. Yet I remain bound by ignorance and suffering, no freer than when I first began. Please, I beg you, show me the way to awakening. Huangpo studied him for a long while, saying nothing. His gaze was steady, penetrating, like a mirror that reflected not the robes, not the reputation, not the letters, but something far more naked. At last, the master spoke, his words as simple as they were disarming. Who is it, he asked, that seeks enlightenment? Wayan felt a flicker of relief. He knew this kind of question well. He had rehearsed the non-dual responses taught in monasteries and could recite them flawlessly. Straightening his back, he answered with confidence, Master, ultimately there is no seeker and nothing to seek. The seeking mind itself is an illusion. Enlightenment is our original nature. It has never been lost. Huangpo nodded slightly. You have studied well. But then he leaned forward, his voice sharpening. Now tell me, if there is no seeker and nothing to seek, why did you walk 3 months across mountains and valleys to find me? If enlightenment is your original nature, unlost and undisturbed, why are you still searching for it? The words struck Wayan like a sudden slap. His well-polished philosophy faltered. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. A familiar frustration welled up inside him, the same torment that had haunted him for years. He understood the teaching intellectually, the futility of seeking, the paradox of searching for what was never absent. Yet in his heart, he still felt the gnawing ache of incompleteness. He still suffered, still longed, still wanted. Lian bowed his head, shame coloring his voice. Master, this is what drives me mad. My mind knows the truth, that there is nothing to seek, but my heart feels no liberation. I can recite the teaching 100 times, yet the chains of suffering still bind me. What am I to do? Huangpo lifted his staff and tapped it once against the wooden floor. The sound echoed through the hall like thunder in a valley. Who told you there is something to do? Your very question is the chain. Every thought of practice, every desire to arrive, every image of awakening you chase. This is what blinds you. The more you grasp, the further you drift. The one who suffers is the one who seeks. Wayan's chest tightened. Then am I to give up? To abandon everything I've practiced? Everything I've devoted my life to? The master's eyes softened, though his tone remained firm. Abandon nothing. Simply stop making a nest in it. Sutras, meditation, discipline, they are rafts to cross the river. But you, Wayan, clutch the raft while standing on dry land, crying out for the shore. Let go of the raft. Look under your own feet. Where else do you imagine Buddha could be found? At these words, Wayan felt as though the air itself had been pulled from his lungs. His mind resisted, flailing for concepts to hold on to. Yet something deeper stirred, a glimpse of a silence more vast than all his seeking. Master, Wayan said desperately, his voice almost breaking, I know these things in my mind, but I don't know them in my heart. I understand the concepts, but I have not realized the truth they point toward. How do I bridge this gap between knowing and being? Huangpo suddenly rose from his seat and began to pace in slow, deliberate circles around the young monk, the sound of his sandals brushing softly against the wooden floor. His presence felt at once playful and immense, like a mountain testing the wind. Tell me, Huangpo said, right now, as you sit here before me, are you enlightened or unenlightened? Wayan froze. His lips trembled. I feel unenlightened, Master. That is why I've come to you for help. Wang Po stopped behind him and spoke in a tone both sharp and compassionate. And this feeling of being unenlightened, where does it come from? Show me your unenlightenment. Place it in my hand, so that I may see this thing which troubles you so deeply. Huayan blinked. His mind raced. He looked outward, as if the answer might be hiding in the shadows of the hall. Then he turned his gaze inward, searching his own heart. I cannot point to it exactly, he admitted slowly. It is more like a sense, like something missing, a thought that I should be different than I am. Ah! Wang Po clapped his hands with sudden force, the sound echoing like thunder. So your so-called enlightenment is nothing but a thought, a restless whisper that insists you should be other than you are. He leaned closer, his eyes piercing. Tell me then, who is aware of this thought? I am, Wei-An replied, almost automatically. And this awareness that notices thoughts of being unenlightened, that observes your longings and doubts. Tell me, is it enlightened or unenlightened? Wyan's mouth opened, but no words came. He felt a strange pressure in his chest, like something inside him was breaking open. I don't know how to answer that. Of course you don't. Huang Po burst into laughter, hearty and unrestrained, like water cascading over rock. Because the awareness that knows thoughts, feelings, and experiences cannot be trapped by such labels. It is not bound by your categories of enlightened or unenlightened. It simply is. It has been here all along, silent, spacious, unshaken by your seeking or your despair. Wei-An's eyes widened. Something within him quivered, as if the ice of a long winter were cracking under the first warmth of spring. But Master, he whispered, if this awareness is already perfect, if it is untouched, why then do I feel so much suffering? Why does life feel so heavy, so incomplete? Huang Po returned to his seat, folding his robe around him with calm dignity. He looked at Wei with infinite tenderness, as though seeing not just the monk, but the entire human struggle embodied before him. The Buddha taught, he said softly, that life contains suffering. The cause of suffering is attachment. The cessation of suffering is possible, and there is a path to that cessation. But tell me, Wei-An, who suffers? I do, Wei-An said, his voice small. Show me this I that suffers, Huang Po replied gently, but firmly. Is it your body, which is simply flesh, bone and breath? Is it your thoughts which rise and vanish like clouds in the sky? Is it your feelings which shift like the wind across the valley? Or is it the awareness that observes all of these, the same awareness that has never once been bound by them? At these words, Wei-An sat utterly still. For the first time in his long journey, he felt himself truly turning to look not at thoughts, not at feelings, not at doctrines or sutras, but at the very one who was aware of them all. A silence fell between them, vast and alive, stretching wider than any teaching. Wei-An sat in silence, turning his attention inward with a depth of investigation he had never brought to his own experience before. He noticed thoughts bubbling up, flickering, then dissolving into nothing. He observed emotions flowing through his body like shifting weather patterns, clouds gathering, storms passing, clear sky returning. He felt sensations appearing and disappearing, each one momentary, none able to stay. And underneath all these changing movements was something still, something constant, the simple awareness that knew them all. The awareness itself doesn't suffer, Wei-An said slowly, as though uncovering a hidden jewel. It only watches suffering appear and disappear. The pain belongs to what is passing. The awareness remains untouched. Exactly, Huang Po beamed, his eyes flashing with both fierceness and joy. Your true nature, This aware presence that you actually are has never once been touched by suffering. Suffering belongs to the story you tell about yourself, not to what you actually are. You have been seeking to become what you have never stopped being. Tears welled in Wayan's eyes and began to flow freely, yet they were not tears of grief or frustration, but of recognition, of homecoming. It was like suddenly catching his own reflection after years of searching everywhere else for a face he thought he had lost. "But Master," he whispered through the tears, "if this is true, why didn't anyone tell me this before? Why have I spent 15 years seeking what was never lost?" "They did tell you." Huangpo's smile was gentle now, almost playful. Every teacher, every sutra, every meditation practice was pointing you back to this very awareness. But you were so busy seeking, so convinced something was missing, that you could not hear what they were actually saying. Your very seeking was like a man searching frantically for his glasses, while wearing them all along. A soft laugh escaped Wayan's lips, half joy, half disbelief. "So, what do I do now? How do I practice with this understanding?" "Stop practicing," Huangpo laughed, clapping his hands. "Stop seeking. Stop trying to become enlightened. Just be the awareness you already are. Let thoughts come and go as they will. Why make them into problems to solve? Let feelings arise and pass. Why imagine they are obstacles to overcome? Simply rest as what you are, the aware presence that needs nothing, lacks nothing, and has never been disturbed by any experience." A silence followed. This time it was not the silence of confusion or resistance, but of clarity. A silence alive with understanding. Can you feel the profound liberation in Huangpo's pointing? He was not offering Wayan another method, another staircase to climb, another project of self-improvement. He was showing him the futility of the very search itself. The seeker and the sought had never been separate. The one chasing after truth had always been truth itself, running in circles, mistaking movement for progress. The Buddha taught that the cessation of suffering comes through the cessation of craving. But what Huangpo exposed is that even spiritual craving, even the desire for enlightenment, keeps us bound to the wheel of seeking, forever postponing the recognition of what is already here. Most of us approach spirituality exactly as Wayan did, with the subtle assumption that we must become something other than what we are. We meditate in order to achieve peace. We study to gain wisdom. We practice to attain enlightenment. But all of this effort, while sincere, can easily become another form of the same grasping that created our sense of lack in the first place. What Huangpo understood and what he pressed his students to see is that awareness itself, the simple fact that you are conscious right now, is already the treasure every spiritual tradition points toward. It cannot be purified, improved, or developed. It can only be noticed, recognized for what it already is. And when this recognition dawns, the endless cycle of seeking collapses. What you were looking for turns out to be the very looking itself. One of his most beloved paintings was nothing more than a single circle, drawn with one continuous stroke. No decorations, no details, just an open circle that seemed to hold infinity within its emptiness. To the casual eye it looked incomplete, perhaps even careless. But to those who sat with it, the circle radiated a quiet power. It was called Enso, a symbol of both perfection and imperfection, of emptiness and wholeness, of the infinite contained in the most ordinary gesture. Sangai never explained his paintings directly. When visitors asked what they meant, he would only smile and invite them to sit quietly before the image. "Let the circle teach you," he would say, and often it did. One day, A wealthy merchant from the town came to Sangai in great distress. Though he had amassed more riches than most could dream of, he was plagued by constant worry, afraid of losing his fortune, anxious about competitors, suspicious of friends who might betray him. He found no peace, even in his luxurious home. "Master Sangai," the man pleaded, "please teach me how to find peace. I have everything money can buy, yet my mind is restless. I cannot sleep. I cannot trust. I cannot stop worrying about what might be taken from me." Sangai listened without interruption. Then, without a word, he dipped his brush in black ink and painted a simple circle on fresh white paper. He pushed it gently toward the merchant. "What does this mean?" the man asked impatiently. "This," Sangai replied, "is your mind." The merchant frowned. "But my mind is full of thoughts, plans, fears, calculations. This circle is empty." Sangai nodded. "Yes. Beneath all those restless thoughts, your mind is like this circle, open, whole, without beginning or end. But you do not see it, because you fill it with worries until there is no space left. Peace is not something you can buy or hold. Peace is what remains when you stop crowding your circle with what you don't need." The merchant stared at the circle for a long time. For the first time in years, he stopped thinking about money, loss, or reputation. In the simplicity of ink on paper, he saw something he had overlooked: the peace of emptiness. Can you feel the teaching hidden in Sangai's circle? The circle is empty, yet complete. It lacks nothing, yet welcomes everything. Our lives too are like this, when we fill them with endless striving, possessions, and worries. We feel restless and incomplete. But when we allow space, when we let go of what clutters the mind, we discover the wholeness that was already present. The Buddha said, "Better it is to live one day seeing the state of arising and passing away than to live 100 years without ever seeing it." The circle of peace invites us to see directly the arising and passing of thoughts, fears, and desires within the boundless space of awareness. Tonight, as you rest, can you sense the circle of peace within your own experience? Notice the thoughts that come and go, the sensations that ripple through the body, the emotions that color your heart. Then notice the open awareness in which they all appear. Like Sangai's circle, your awareness is already whole, already complete, already at peace. You don't need to add anything to it. You only need to stop crowding it. Sometimes the most profound wisdom is not in adding more, but in seeing the perfect completeness of less. As Sangai painted, something remarkable happened. Though the clamor of the market continued, children's laughter, merchants quarreling, wheels clattering, the merchant's attention was drawn wholly into the movement of the brush. For a brief moment, the noise outside seemed distant, like waves breaking on a faraway shore. All that remained was the steady hand, the single stroke, and the circle taking form. When Sangai set down the brush, silence seemed to settle between them, not because the marketplace had grown quiet, but because the merchant's mind had. He found himself gazing at the circle, unable to look away. "Master," he whispered, almost afraid to disturb the stillness that had arisen within. "What is this?" "This is your mind," Sangai said softly. "Open, whole, without beginning or end. The noise of the world passes through it, like clouds across the sky. The sky itself is not disturbed." The merchant frowned, his brow furrowing. "But I hear the shouting, the arguments, the clamor of the market. I feel the restlessness in my chest. How can you say my mind is not disturbed?" Sangai leaned forward and tapped the paper lightly with the tip of his finger. "Look closely. Do you see where the circle begins? Where it ends? Do you see where the paper resists or struggles against the ink? No. The circle is complete, effortless. It allows the brush to move and does not hold on to any mark. In the same way, awareness allows every thought, every sound, every feeling to appear within it, yet it itself remains untouched. The merchant sat in silence, still staring at the circle. The shouting outside rose again, then fell, like waves cresting and dissolving. For the first time, he realized that the noise did not have to disturb him. It was only his clinging, his resistance, his demand for silence that created turmoil within. Sangai smiled as he saw recognition dawning in the man's eyes. You search for peace in mountain retreats or silent halls, but true peace is not found by running away from the world. True peace is discovered when you realize that even in the midst of chaos, your awareness is already whole, already complete. Like this circle, the merchant felt tears welling in his eyes. Then peace is not somewhere else. It is here, in this very moment, if I only stop grasping. Sangai nodded gently. Exactly. When you stop filling the circle with worry, it reveals the spaciousness that was always there. This is the peace you seek, not the absence of sound or challenge, but the stillness that holds them all. The merchant bowed deeply, his heart lighter than it had been in many years. Outside, the marketplace roared on. Children laughed, merchants argued, carts rolled by, but within him, a new space had opened, vast and silent, like the circle on the paper. The merchant gazed at the small dot within the circle. At first, it seemed insignificant, almost too simple. Yet the longer he looked, the more he realized its quiet power. The dot did not resist the circle around it, nor did it try to control what entered. It simply was. Sangai leaned back, his eyes soft but steady. In your business, when competitors pressure you, when problems multiply, where does your attention go? To the edges, the merchant admitted. To the noise, the demands, the ever-changing troubles. Exactly, Sangai said. Your mind runs to the circumference of the circle, chasing after every ripple of activity. But the center never moves. If you rest your attention here, he pointed to the dot, you will see that all storms are only movements around the stillness that was never disturbed. The merchant felt his breath deepen, as though a weight he carried had shifted. For the first time in many years, he noticed the simple rhythm of air moving in and out of his body. Even as the market erupted with new commotion outside, he felt a stillness growing within. Master, he whispered, it feels almost too easy. Can it really be so simple? Sangai chuckled softly. It is simple, but not easy, because the mind resists simplicity. It longs for complexity, methods, and effort. Yet the truth of peace is found only in returning again and again to this center until you realize you never left it. Just then, a young child who had been playing outside ran into the temple, chasing a ball that had rolled across the floor. The merchant tensed, instinctively annoyed by the intrusion. But before he could speak, Sangai smiled and gestured toward the child. See, he said, pointing at the ball that had come to rest near the circle on the paper. Life will always roll into your temple uninvited. If you meet it from the circumference, you will feel disturbed. If you meet it from the center, you will smile. The merchant looked at the painted circle, the tiny dot, and the child laughing as he retrieved his toy. And in that ordinary moment, he understood. Peace was not something to be built or protected. It was something to be remembered, no matter what entered the circle of his life. He bowed deeply. Thank you, Master. I think I have seen my own circle, at last. The merchant watched as Sangai continued to move his brush, adding a few gentle strokes around the circle. Each line seemed effortless, as though it arose by itself. The circle did not become cluttered, nor did it lose its essence. Instead, the additions revealed something deeper, that simplicity can embrace complexity without being disturbed by it. The market noise still poured through the windows, merchants calling, wheels rattling, animals bleating, children shouting. Yet somehow, the sound no longer felt like an intrusion. To the merchant's surprise, it seemed to belong, like the rhythm of waves against a shore. He felt himself settling into a tranquility he had never known, not because the noise had ceased, but because his resistance to it had. Sangai broke the silence with words as calm as his brushstrokes. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from resistance to what is. When we try to push away noise, control circumstances, or demand that life be other than it is, we create the very agitation we seek to escape. But when we rest in the circle of awareness, the space vast enough to hold both silence and sound, we discover the peace that has never been disturbed. The merchant sat quietly, his breathing slower now, his mind less tangled. For years, his life had been driven by the pressure to control outcomes, to outmaneuver competitors, to bend the world to his will. Yet in this simple circle, he saw a teaching far greater than any strategy, that the space of awareness within him was untouched by the chaos outside. His usual worries about business suddenly felt lighter, like clouds passing across an open sky. At last he bowed and said softly, "Master, may I have this painting, so I may carry its lesson with me?" Sangai chuckled warmly, handing the brush instead of the paper. "The circle is not in this painting," he said. "The circle is what you are. If you wish for a reminder, paint your own. Each time your hand draws a circle, remember, peace is not something you create, it is what you already contain." The merchant took the brush with trembling hands, suddenly realizing the depth of the invitation. It was not about owning an image, but about touching the truth within himself. Can you feel the simplicity and power of Sangai's teaching? His circle revealed that peace does not depend on quiet environments or controlled circumstances. It is not the absence of chaos, but the presence of awareness that can hold chaos without being shaken by it. Most of us exhaust ourselves seeking peace in perfect conditions. We wait for silence, retreat to special places, or try to shield ourselves from interruptions. These strategies may soothe us briefly, but as soon as life's inevitable noise returns, agitation rises again. This is because we mistake peace for the fragile stillness of conditions, rather than the unshakable spaciousness of awareness. True peace is not the opposite of disturbance. It is the space in which both disturbance and calm appear. Like Sangai's circle, your true nature is vast enough to hold every experience, joy and sorrow, chaos and stillness, without being diminished by any of them. Reflect for a moment. How much of your energy is spent trying to control your environment, to maintain a sense of peace? When unexpected noise, interruptions, or sudden changes arise, how often do you react with agitation, as though your peace has been stolen? What would it feel like to rest instead in Sangai's circle, allowing every disturbance to exist within a larger field of acceptance? The dot at the center of the circle reveals the heart of the teaching. It represents the still point of awareness, the witnessing presence that notices all experiences but is never shaken by them. This center is not a place in your body, nor a thought in your mind. It is the simple, undeniable fact that you are conscious. Right now, as you read these words, there is awareness around you. Sounds may rise and fall, voices in another room, the hum of traffic, the rustling of leaves. Thoughts may pass, feelings may stir, yet the awareness that knows them remains steady, untouched. Like the merchant, you can return to this center at any moment. You do not need to create it, search for it, or hold on to it. You only need to notice that it has been here all along, silently watching, endlessly spacious, perfectly still. But what they found in Suzuki Roshi was not the stern coach of progress they expected. He didn't praise achievement or promise enlightenment in 10 easy steps. Instead, he offered them something at once disarming and liberating: the invitation to be exactly where they were without needing to advance at all. In those days, Zen practice in America was still fresh and unfamiliar. Many students came with restless energy, bringing the same ambition they had carried into their careers and studies. They wanted to get somewhere, to reach enlightenment, as if it were a prize at the finish line of diligent effort. But Suzuki Roshi would smile gently and remind them, the most important point is to accept yourself and start from there. This was not the answer they expected. They wanted technique, progress charts, and secret formulas. What he offered instead was the paradoxical teaching later called beginner's mind, the understanding that true practice does not depend on mastery, but on openness, curiosity, and humility. In the meditation hall, professors who were accustomed to being experts found themselves instructed to just sit. Executives used to give orders were told to simply notice their breath. Artists who had cultivated sophistication were encouraged to drop their cleverness and sit as if they knew nothing at all. Suzuki Roshi saw clearly that his students' eagerness to become enlightened was the very barrier keeping them from recognizing the awareness already present in each moment. He would say, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." To meditate with beginner's mind meant to let go of striving and return to the simplicity of presence itself, to feel the breath without trying to control it, to notice thoughts without needing to fix them, to bow without measuring whether the bow was graceful or clumsy. This teaching was revolutionary for Westerners, trained to measure success by improvement. They struggled at first, wanting to know whether they were doing it right. Suzuki Roshi would gently laugh and say, "You're already perfect, and you could use a little improvement." The paradox both puzzled and liberated his students. Slowly, they began to see that perfect practice wasn't about achieving flawless meditation, but about completely being with whatever was happening, even boredom, even restlessness, even doubt. For Suzuki Roshi, Zazen, seated meditation, was not a technique to reach a goal. It was the full expression of Buddha nature itself. To sit upright, breathe, and be present was already enlightenment in action. Nothing needed to be added. Nothing was missing. Can you feel the quiet revolution in Suzuki Roshi's teaching? He turned the Western drive for accomplishment upside down, revealing that the most valuable quality in practice was not mastery, but humility, not progress, but presence. Tonight, as you rest in your own body, can you approach yourself with this beginner's mind? Can you let go of the pressure to get it right, and instead notice the simplicity of being here? Breath moving, heart beating, awareness quietly holding it all. Perfect practice is not about polishing yourself into some imagined ideal. It is about allowing yourself to be fully alive in this moment, exactly as you are. David blinked in disbelief. Progress? He had come expecting praise for discipline, maybe guidance toward advanced techniques. Instead, his teacher was applauding the very thing he thought was failure. "Roshi, I don't understand," David said, shaking his head. "I thought meditation was supposed to make my mind quiet. If awareness of noise is progress, then won't I just stay stuck in this chaos forever?" Suzuki Roshi smiled, the corners of his mouth curling upward with childlike playfulness. "When you sit by a river, do you try to stop the water from flowing?" "Of course not," David replied. "And yet you want to stop your thoughts from flowing," Roshi said softly. Why? The river flows. The mind flows. Awareness is the bank that holds them both. David felt something loosen inside him, though he couldn't quite name it. He had been straining against his own mind, trying to wrestle it into silence, like a lawyer arguing a case he could never win. Seeing his puzzled expression, Suzuki Roshi leaned closer. Good meditation is not when the mind is quiet. Good meditation is when you notice the mind, noisy or quiet, and you do not fight it. You let it. The words landed with surprising force. For months, David had measured every session by how close he came to the peace described in books. Now Roshi was suggesting that peace was not the absence of disturbance, but the willingness to be present with whatever arose. But Roshi, David whispered, if meditation doesn't make the mind quiet, then what is the point of practice? Suzuki Roshi's eyes twinkled. To sit, just sit. That is the point. To be completely yourself in this moment. No need to add anything. No need to take anything away. This is perfect practice. For a long while David sat, in silence, letting the paradox wash over him. Perhaps he thought his frustration itself was part of the path, not a sign of failure, but an invitation to see more clearly. Later that night, as he returned to his cushion, he no longer strained for results. He simply sat, feeling his breath rise and fall, noticing thoughts come and go, and for the first time since he began, there was no battle to win. There was only sitting. Sometimes his mind still wandered wildly, rushing from one worry to the next. But instead of treating this as failure, David began to notice the wandering with the same openness he gave to the breath. Ah, he would think, here is restlessness. At other times a heavy drowsiness would settle over him. Ah, he thought again, here is sleepiness. In this way, even distraction and fatigue became teachers rather than enemies. He started to realize what Suzuki Roshi had meant. Beginner's mind isn't about ignorance, it's about intimacy, the willingness to meet whatever arises, without preconception, without judgment, without clinging to yesterday's meditation or longing for tomorrow's. One morning, after sitting in silence with his fellow students, David lingered in the zendo while others filed out. The light of dawn filtered through the paper windows, catching in the faint dust that floated in the air. He sat still, breathing, and for a fleeting moment it was as if the whole room were alive in its quiet presence. The creak of the floorboards, the faint sound of traffic outside, the steady rhythm of his own chest. Nothing had changed, and yet everything shimmered with freshness. Later, he shared his experience with Suzuki Roshi, who simply chuckled. Yes, very good. The world is always like this. Only now you are seeing it. Beginner's mind is not something you practice for 6 months or 6 years. Beginner's mind is forever. David realized that his teacher was pointing to something far beyond meditation sessions. Beginner's mind was a way of being in the world, at work. Instead of assuming he already understood a client's problem, he began to listen more carefully, as though hearing it for the first time. At home, instead of treating conversations with his wife as routine, he began to meet her words with renewed curiosity. Even the simple act of washing dishes became an opportunity to discover water, soap, and motion, as if brand new. The more he lived this way, the lighter his life felt. He no longer carried the constant burden of measuring, comparing, and evaluating himself. Each moment stood on its own, complete and sufficient. And yet, Suzuki Roshi never let him become too comfortable. Whenever David proudly reported that he was finally getting the hang of beginner's mind, Roshi would laugh and shake his head. If you think you understand, you already lost it. Just return to not knowing. Again and again. That is the way. This art of expert beginner's mind is subtle but powerful. It doesn't mean throwing away what you know, but wearing it as lightly as a robe that can be set aside when it no longer serves. Knowledge can guide your hands, but curiosity keeps your heart awake. Without curiosity, knowledge stiffens into habit. With curiosity, even habit becomes alive again. Suzuki Roshi often reminded his students that Zen practice was not about acquiring something new, but about uncovering what had never been lost. Beginner's mind is simply the natural mind, the child's mind, the unclouded awareness that greets each moment with wonder. The difference is that now, as adults, we practice consciously returning to that openness rather than leaving it behind. Consider a child encountering rain for the first time. They don't analyze the weather report or complain about inconvenience. They stretch out their hands, laugh at the cool drops, marvel at the sky spilling water. Somewhere along the way, most of us forget that joy, replacing it with routine, complaint, or avoidance. Beginner's mind restores the possibility of meeting rain that way again, not by denying adulthood, but by remembering the freshness that has always been available. David came to see that this principle could transform not only meditation, but also the fabric of daily living. At work, beginner's mind meant approaching problems without assuming he already had the right answer. In relationships, it meant listening without rehearsing replies or clinging to past judgments. Even in solitude, it meant allowing each breath, each step, each sound to be received as though for the first time. The more he practiced, the more he noticed a paradox. Beginner's mind required effort, yet the effort was always to return to effortlessness. It was like loosening a tight grip again and again, remembering that life reveals itself more fully when he stopped trying to hold it so firmly. This is why Suzuki Roshi's smile carried such depth when he welcomed new students who whispered, "I don't know what I'm doing." To Roshi, these words were not a confession of weakness, but a hidden treasure. For in the willingness not to know, the whole world becomes available. Beginner's mind is not something to achieve once and keep forever. It is a practice of rediscovery, moment by moment, like wiping dust from a mirror to reveal the clarity beneath. As long as we live, the invitation remains to meet this breath, this sound, this encounter, this life, fresh, unguarded, and new. One morning, after a long meditation session, Dogen noticed an elderly monk in the kitchen hall. The monk was sweating in the summer heat, carefully washing vegetables and laying them out to dry. His movements were precise yet unhurried, as if each turn of the hand, each splash of water, contained the fullness of practice. Curious, Dogen approached and asked respectfully, "Why do you, at your advanced age, work so hard in the kitchen instead of resting or studying sutras?" The old monk looked up, eyes bright with clarity, and replied, "Who else will do it?" Dogen pressed further, "Surely younger monks could take on this labor, leaving you free for higher pursuits like meditation and scripture study." The monk's response cut through Dogen's assumptions, like a bell in still night. Practice is not separate from this. To wash the vegetables is the way. To prepare the meal is the way. There is no higher pursuit than this very moment. Dogen was struck silent. The simplicity of the answer revealed something he had missed in years of striving. Enlightenment was not hidden in distant achievements, but right in front of him, in the act of meeting life fully as it was. Still, Dogen's longing remained. He trained tirelessly, always feeling as if the final key still escaped him. Then, one evening, he attended a lecture by his teacher, Rujing. In the quiet candlelit hall, Rujing spoke of meditation not as a means to an end, but as the direct expression of enlightenment itself. To study Zen, he said, is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by the 10,000 things. In that moment, Dogen's heart opened. He saw clearly that his desperate search for enlightenment had been like running with eyes fixed on the horizon, never noticing the ground beneath his feet. What he sought was not somewhere else, not sometime later. It was this very moment, this breath, this sound, this turning of awareness already complete. When Dogen later returned to Japan, he carried this realization with him, distilling it into the profound teaching of Shikantaza, just sitting, nothing to achieve, nowhere to arrive, simply resting in the vivid immediacy of this moment as it is. So, you just sat, Rujing repeated softly, almost as if savoring the words. That is very good. Dogen blinked in confusion. Good? But master, I gained nothing. I didn't see into my true nature. I didn't have visions. I didn't break through any barriers. I only sat there, restless and distracted. Rujing's eyes sparkled with gentle amusement. And yet, who is it that knows all of this? Who is it that notices the wandering mind, the discomfort, the lack of special experience? That awareness itself is the Buddha's realization. Enlightenment is not something you achieve by collecting experiences. It is simply waking up to what has always been here. Dogen's heart stirred, though his mind still wrestled. But master, if enlightenment is just this ordinary awareness, why do the sutras speak of great liberation, of transcending birth and death? Rujing lifted his gaze toward the rafters of the meditation hall, where a thin shaft of morning light streamed through a crack in the roof. Dust motes floated, drifting in and out of the beam. Look, he said, pointing. The light does not choose which dust to illuminate. It shines on all equally. In the same way, true awareness does not divide between sacred and ordinary, success and failure, progress and defeat. It simply illuminates all as it is. This is the liberation that cannot be shaken. At that moment, something shifted deep within Dogen. Years of striving, of measuring, of comparing, suddenly felt unnecessary, like scales falling from his eyes. He saw that enlightenment was not waiting for him in some distant future. It was here, in this very act of sitting, in this very breath, in this simple beam of light. Tears welled in his eyes. For the first time he understood why his master spoke so often of sweeping floors and preparing vegetables. These were not distractions from practice. They were the practice itself. Rujing placed a hand gently on Dogen's shoulder. From now on, sit with horizontal eyes, he said softly. Not looking up toward heaven, not looking down toward attainment or failure, but seeing directly, evenly, with nothing left out. Horizontal eyes see that everything already rests in Buddha nature, this floor, this light, this breath, even your restless thoughts. Nothing is excluded. In that moment, Dogen bowed deeply, gratitude overflowing. What he had sought across seas and through years of study had always been here, hidden in plain sight. Dogen bowed his head, letting the words sink in. For years he had strained towards some shining ideal, measuring his practice against invisible standards. Now his master was telling him that the very simplicity he had overlooked, sitting, breathing, being, was already the living expression of enlightenment. But master, Dogen whispered, his voice trembling, if there is truly nothing to gain, then what becomes of all the sutras, the teachings, the methods? Why did the Buddha himself sit beneath the Bodhi tree for so many days? Rujing's eyes softened with compassion. The Buddha sat, not to acquire something he lacked, but to embody fully what was already true. The sutras and teachings are not maps to a hidden treasure. They are reminders that the treasure has never been lost. We chant, we bow, we study, we sit, not to arrive anywhere, but to express gratitude for what already is. Practice is simply the flowering of enlightenment, not the path to it. The hall was quiet, except for the faint creak of wood as the old building settled. Dogen felt his heart beat in rhythm with the stillness. His master's words no longer sounded like riddles. They rang like a clear bell. So, Dogen said slowly, this body sitting here, these eyes horizontal, this nose vertical, this very ordinariness is none other than the Buddha's truth. Not something to escape from, but something to embody. Rujing nodded, his smile widening. Exactly. The sacred is not elsewhere. It is this. He tapped the floorboards beneath them. It is the creak of the wood, the sound of your own breathing, the sensation of sitting upright. It is so simple you have overlooked it your whole life. For the first time in years, Dogen did not feel like a seeker. He felt like a participant in a reality that had always been whole, a reality that required no improvement. The heavy burden of striving slipped from his shoulders, leaving a quiet clarity in its place. Rujing rose to leave, but turned back at the doorway. Remember, Dogen, eyes horizontal, nose vertical. Never forget the simplicity of what is. This is the gateway through which the whole Dharma enters the world. Something in those ordinary words struck Dogen's heart like a lightning bolt, not with drama, but with a liberating plainness. He finally understood. Enlightenment was not elsewhere, not later, not other. It was always this. When we stop sitting for something, we discover the wonder of sitting as something. Just this breath, just this posture, just this awareness, nothing lacking, nothing to add. This is why Dogen would later write, practice and enlightenment are one. For him, practice wasn't a ladder climbing towards some future awakening. Practice is awakening in its fullest expression. When you sit wholeheartedly, without seeking or avoiding, you are already embodying the truth you imagined was far away. Of course, the mind will protest. Surely there must be more than this. Surely enlightenment must feel different. But that protest is exactly what blinds us to the simple suchness already shining in the ordinary. Shikantaza, just sitting, isn't about perfect concentration, special states, or dramatic visions. It's about relaxing into the fact that awareness itself requires nothing from you. It doesn't demand purity. It doesn't measure success. It doesn't ask you to be other than what you are. In daily life, this teaching becomes even more precious. Washing rice, folding laundry, listening to a friend, walking to the store. Each action can be just this, not a means to an end, not a step toward becoming better, but a complete expression of Buddha nature in its most ordinary form. Can you sense the freedom in this? The relief of not having to fix yourself before life can be whole. The release of letting go of the endless project of self-improvement and discovering that even in your confusion, even in your imperfection, even in your striving, you are already sitting as the Buddha. Tonight, as you rest, try this simple invitation. Sit for a moment with no goal, no agenda, no attempt to improve or achieve. Just sit as you are, exactly as you are. Notice how awareness doesn't need your effort to be present. Notice how your very being, here and now, is already complete. This is the gift Dogen carried back across the sea. Not a mystical secret, but the most ordinary truth. Eyes horizontal, nose vertical, just this. At first, Bazo approached archery the way he approached everything else, with intensity and ambition. He drew the bowstring with all his strength, determined to send the arrow farther, faster, straighter than anyone else. His arms ached, his breath grew ragged, and the string often snapped painfully against his skin. The more he tried to control the bow, the less accurate his shots became. Frustrated, he would swing to the opposite extreme, letting his grip soften and his focus drift. His arrows fell limply at his feet, barely leaving the bow at all. Too much effort, and the arrow resists. Too little, and it cannot fly, he muttered, discouraged. One day, his archery teacher, an old master who had spent a lifetime with the bow, watched Baso struggle and then set down his own weapon. He invited Baso to stand beside him under the shade of a cypress tree. Without words, the master slowly drew back his bow. His movements were unhurried, steady, almost serene. It was as if the bow itself wanted to be pulled, as if the arrow itself longed to be released. When the master finally let go, the arrow soared effortlessly and struck the center of the target. "Did you see?" the master asked. "I saw you hit the target," Baso replied. "No," said the master softly. "The target hit itself." Baso puzzled over these words. The teacher explained, "Archery is not about you forcing the arrow to fly. It is about aligning yourself so fully with the bow, the breath, and the moment that the arrow's flight happens naturally. Too much effort, and you separate yourself from the process. Too little effort, and you are not truly participating. But when effort and ease come together, the arrow finds its own way." Something in Baso's heart settled. He began to practice differently. Instead of shooting to prove himself, he began shooting simply to express balance, strong yet relaxed, precise yet fluid, engaged yet surrendered. His arrows no longer always hit the center of the target, but his practice itself became the center. Over time, this balance infused every part of his life. He walked with the same poise, spoke with the same harmony, and even in silence, his presence carried the stillness of a drawn bow, full of potential, yet perfectly at rest. Students who came to study with him discovered that his greatest lesson was not about archery at all. It was about the middle way, the path between extremes, the art of doing with full sincerity while also letting go of resistance. Baso would often remind his disciples, whether drawing a bow, preparing tea, or walking down a mountain path, give yourself completely, but do not grasp at outcomes. Let the arrow of your life fly freely. Effort and ease belong together. Tonight, as you reflect on Baso's way, you might ask yourself, where in your life are you straining, pulling too hard at the bowstring, and where have you grown slack, letting the arrow fall before it can fly? Can you find, even for a moment, that delicate balance where strength and softness meet? Like the arrow released from the bow, your own life can move with natural grace when you discover the balance of caring deeply and holding lightly. You are trying to be either strong or gentle, Master Wu would observe, shaking his head with a small smile. But the bow does not ask you to choose. It asks you to become both at once. At first, Baso tried to force this harmony, as though balance itself were another skill to master through sheer will. But every time he thought he had found the middle, something felt off. His body tightened, his breathing grew uneven, and the arrow wobbled clumsily in the air. One evening, as the lanterns were being lit around the practice field, Master Wu approached him after another failed attempt. "Baso," he said softly, "balance is not something you create. It is something you allow." The words puzzled Baso, yet they struck a chord. That night, he lay awake, replaying the master's demonstration in his mind. He remembered how the old man's draw was fierce yet unstrained, and how his release was soft yet precise, as natural as a leaf falling when its time has come. In the days that followed, Baso began to shift his focus. Instead of trying to make balance happen, he started noticing what already interfered with it. He saw how pride stiffened his shoulders, how fear made his hands tremble, how striving clouded his breath. Slowly, he began letting go of these inner tensions, one by one, until the bow felt less like an object to control and more like a partner to meet. One morning, while practicing alone, something changed. He drew the bow with complete sincerity, every muscle alive, every breath steady. Then, without deciding, without trying, his fingers simply opened. The arrow flew straight and true, cutting the air in silence. Basso felt no surge of triumph, no rush of accomplishment. Instead, he felt a quiet stillness, as though the arrow had flown not from him but through him.
When he told Master Wu what had happened, the old man nodded knowingly. "Now you have tasted it," he said. "Effort without grasping, strength without tension. This is the way of the archer. The arrow does not fly because you force it. It flies because you allow it."
From that day on, Basso's archery transformed. His shots were not always perfect, but his practice carried a new quality of ease. Other students noticed how his movements became simple, fluid, unself-conscious. It was as though the bow itself were teaching him. Years later, when Basso had become a master in his own right, he would tell students, "Life is no different from the bow. Give yourself fully to the drawing, to your work, your relationships, your practice. But when the moment of release comes, let go completely. Do not cling to outcomes. Do not disturb the natural flight of the arrow. When strength and gentleness unite, balance is revealed. And from balance, everything flows." Students would whisper among themselves, wondering how Basso seemed untouched by the storms of daily life. He showed no trace of the restlessness that plagued others, no grasping after success, no shrinking away from difficulty, whether praised or criticized, whether the harvest was abundant or poor, whether his body felt strong or weary. He carried the same quiet steadiness. When asked about his secret, Basso would often pick up an imaginary bow and mime the motion of drawing and releasing. "The arrow teaches everything," he would say. "Draw with your whole heart, release with your whole trust. Do both completely, and life flows without resistance." Some students found the teaching too simple. They wanted elaborate techniques, hidden mantras, or mystical visions. But Basso never offered more than this, the living demonstration of balance in every step, every gesture, every word. He knew that the principle of the bow was not limited to archery. It was the very rhythm of existence itself. The sun rises with complete intensity, pouring forth its light without holding back. And yet, it sets each evening with complete surrender, asking nothing in return. The tree grows with fierce determination, pushing roots deep and branches high, yet every autumn it lets its leaves fall without resistance. The universe itself is always drawing and releasing, effort and ease, fullness and emptiness, birth and death, in a perfect arc. To live in harmony with this rhythm, Basso taught, is to live in peace. To resist it is to suffer. So when a student would come to him, anxious about failure or desperate for success, he would remind them, "You cannot control where the arrow lands. Your task is only to draw with sincerity and release with freedom. Do this, and whatever happens is already complete." Over time, those who practiced with him began to sense what he embodied. They discovered that the same middle way could be found not just in the practice field, but in every corner of life, in the way they studied, in the way they spoke to their families, in the way they walked through the marketplace. Balance was not something hidden or distant. It was always available in the meeting of strength and softness, intention and surrender, doing and letting go. Basso would pause after such demonstrations, letting his students sit with the lesson rather than rushing to explain further. He knew that true understanding was not in the words but in the felt experience of balance itself. The bow was just a mirror, revealing the inner condition of the one who held it. Notice, he would say softly, how your body feels when you grip the string too tightly. The tension spreads through your shoulders. Your breath becomes shallow. Your vision narrows. Now notice what happens when you draw half-heartedly, without full commitment. The arrow has no life in it. Both extremes lead to suffering, in archery and in life. The students would nod, feeling these truths, not as abstractions, but as realities in their own muscles and minds. This middle way, Baso continued, is not an idea to be believed. It is something to be discovered in the living of each moment. It is found in the quality of how you stir a pot of rice, in how you greet a neighbor, in how you sit in silence with yourself. When effort and release become one motion, your whole life begins to move with the same natural grace as the arrow's flight. He often reminded them that even the Buddha had spoken of this balance under the Bodhi tree. The path of awakening was not one of self-punishment, nor one of indulgence, but of harmony, a way of walking that honored both discipline and joy. Archery is only my way of showing you what the Buddha showed with his life, Baso said. And then he would look directly into their eyes, his voice both fierce and tender. Try this in your life. When you love someone, love them completely, but let them be free. When you work, give yourself fully, but release the outcome. When you face difficulty, meet it with all your strength, but do not hold on to victory or defeat. Draw with everything, release with everything. This is freedom. The students would sit in silence after such teaching, arrows still in hand, feeling that the lesson had traveled beyond archery into the very marrow of their lives. When we live with Baso's archer-like balance, our actions become more skillful, not because we control them, but because they arise from a center untouched by grasping or fear. From this centeredness, effort flows without strain, and release happens without resistance. We can stand with life exactly as it is, difficulties, joys, uncertainties, and all, without being consumed by them. We can savor successes without becoming enslaved to them for our identity or worth. Take a quiet moment to consider, where in your own life do you live at the edges? Perhaps you lean too far into striving, so preoccupied with the future of a relationship that you forget to taste the sweetness of its present. Maybe in your work you care so fiercely about outcomes that your very caring undermines your ability to perform with reality and ease. Or perhaps tired of stress, you've withdrawn so far into guarding your peace that you've lost the intimacy of real connection and engagement. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us suffering is not born merely from life's circumstances, but from the rigid extremes we inhabit in relation to them. Baso discovered a different possibility, the middle way, where strength and softness, effort and release, care and freedom coexist as one. In this way, we can be fully human, tender, passionate, deeply engaged, while also deeply free. Tonight, as this circle of stories draws toward completion, can you feel Baso's bow in your own hands? Can you imagine drawing back the string of your intention with full commitment, then releasing the arrow of your action into the wide sky of life with perfect trust? Can you sense how tomorrow might be different if you lived with this balance? Nothing half-hearted, nothing forced. Every moment a union of effort and release. Perhaps this is the most practical wisdom these 13 stories have offered. The realization that you do not have to choose between caring and letting go, between effort and ease, between engagement and peace. Like the master archer, you can embody them all, discovering a way of living that is wholehearted, yet unbound, strong yet gentle, fully human, and deeply wise. And so, as our time together comes to a close, let us look back at the path we've walked. 13 teachings, 13 openings of the heart, each one a quiet jewel placed in your hands. We sat with Dogen as his manuscripts scattered on mountain winds, learning that what cannot be lost is the true treasure. We walked with Bankei, who taught us how to rest in the unborn mind that cannot be disturbed by storms. We listened to Sengai's brush painting, a circle that revealed peace in the very midst of chaos. We sat at Suzuki Roshi's feet and discovered the preciousness of beginner's mind. And we stood with Bazo, watching arrows fly as balance revealed the way of freedom. Each story has been like a lantern, illuminating not some distant path, but the very ground beneath your feet. Finding peace is not about chasing a life without chaos, but about discovering the awareness that remains undisturbed in the very midst of it. Sean reminded us that when life brings fire, we do not have to burn. Patient Joshu whispered that wisdom cannot be forced. It ripens in its own season, like fruit under the quiet sun. Iku revealed the freedom of needing less, showing us that simplicity itself is fullness. Ryoan opened our eyes to compassion as our most natural state, not something we manufacture, but something we uncover when the heart is unguarded. Through Dongshan's 3 pounds of flax, we learn to honor the sacred woven into the fabric of the most ordinary moments. Hangpo freed us from endless seeking, reminding us that what we have been searching for has been here all along. Sengai's circle showed us the vast sky of awareness, spacious enough to embrace all things without being bound by any of them. Suzuki Roshi pointed us to the preciousness of not knowing, revealing wonder as the doorway that never closes. Dogen's horizontal gaze revealed enlightenment not as something distant or rare, but as the simple act of being exactly what we are, here and now. And Baso's bow and arrow taught us the art of engaging fully while holding outcomes lightly, the middle way where effort and release move as one. These teachers, though scattered across centuries and mountains, spoke of the same essential truth. Freedom does not depend on the shifting of circumstances, but on the transformation of our relationship to whatever arises. Thank you, dear traveler, for walking this path of stories, for offering your seeking heart to this ancient conversation. From insightful journey, where wisdom flows like silver moonlight through all who remember their original peace, we offer this blessing. May you rest tonight in the quiet knowledge that everything you need for happiness already lives within you. May you awaken tomorrow, refreshed, carrying the gentle strength and subtle joy of these timeless teachings. The moon that Ryoan wished he could place in your hands shines on you even now, offering its light freely, without asking, without end. Rest well, dear friend. The wisdom lives on in you. The journey continues with every breath.